The fire had burned down to a sullen amber by the time it was over. No one had thought to add coal. No one had thought to do anything at all except breathe, carefully, shallowly, as people breathe when they are afraid that a single deep breath might constitute a confession. The room was a study. It had always been a handsome room, dark walnut shelving,
Human nature,
a Persian
mes amis,
rug
is a
of
most
considerable
curious
age
thing.
and dignity,
It compels
two
one to act
windows that
against
looked
one's
out
own
onto the
interests.
street where London carried on,
And the eyes,
indifferent
they
as
reveal
London
what the lips will not.
always is to the private disasters
I sit
occurring
alone,
behind its lit
replaying it in
windows.
my mind.
On the mantelpiece, a clock
The silence
ticked.
of the library
It had been
echoes
ticking
my
all
thoughts.
evening. No one had heard it
My
until
hands
now.
betray the fear I hide.
There were 6 people in the room. 7 if you counted Hercule Poirot, and Poirot, one felt, always counted himself. He stood at the center of the room, not because he had positioned himself there for theatrical effect.
Reginald
though the
Ashbury,
effect
you
was
are under
undeniable,
arrest.
but
No,
because the
this
room
is a
had,
mistake.
in some organic
Hand
and
you fight it
inevitable
down.
way,
Now, deuce.
arranged itself around him. The 6 others had drawn back or turned away or pressed themselves toward the periphery, leaving him at the still point. A small man, an impeccably dressed man. A man with a magnificent mustache and eyes the color of deep water. Not the bright water of the surface, but the water far below, where things settle and stay. He was not speaking. The speaking had already happened.
Observe
What
the hands,
remained was
so
the
tightly
aftermath.
clasped,
A
a
chair
classic sign of
scraped back,
fear, hidden
sudden,
from the world.
violent, the sound
This
of wood
person lived in
against
terror of
wood
a
that
secret
cuts
being
through any
revealed.
room and makes
It is
everyone
written here,
flinch.
plain as day.
The woman nearest the window
Every
pressed
detail
the
of
back
the
of her
murder
hand to
replays
her
in my
mouth.
mind.
Not her palm,
Tonight,
the
reverse
back of her
number,
hand,
assessment
as
of
if
my
she were
life.
catching something that wanted to escape. Her eyes were very wide and
This
very
letter
dry.
from Gerald
She had
Ashbury
perhaps already
changes
spent
everything.
her tears.
He hid it
Or
inside the
perhaps
east
she was
wall
the kind of
alcove.
person who did not
No one
cry
else
in
must
front of
know.
others, who had decided long ago that she would not give anyone that particular satisfaction. By the bookcase, a man set down his glass. He set it down the way a surgeon sets down a scalpel, with excessive, betraying precision. He chose an empty shelf at shoulder height. He aligned the glass with the shelf's edge. He stared at the glass for one moment, as if confirming its reality before allowing his hand to release it. Then he was very still. Near the door, a young man stood with his back against the wood paneling, arms crossed, jaw set. The posture of someone who had spent 7 days telling himself
You were
that
manipulating me
innocence
this
was its
whole
own protection,
time.
and had, in the
Indeed,
last 6 minutes,
the
been
game is
forced to
over.
revise this opinion entirely. He was not looking at Poirot.
You thought
He
you
was
could
looking
hide
at
this?
the fire, or
I
at the
know
place
everything.
the fire
What
had
is
been.
that? Where did you get it?
The
The
distinction
details
perhaps
don't matter.
mattered
You will
less than
do
it
as I
once
say,
had.
or this goes
An older
public.
woman, rigid in her chair, straight backed the way women of her generation had been trained to sit, as though the spine were a moral instrument, had closed her eyes. She was not unconscious. Her hands lay
I must
open in
appear
her lap,
innocent,
palms upward, in a
unaware of
gesture
any
that
guilt.
looked almost like surrender,
My hands
almost
stay
like
now.
prayer.
Poirot's gaze misses
And
nothing.
across the room, by the cold radiator,
Innocent.
the
I am
last figure
innocent.
stood. The one around
poison
whom
was in the
everything
cup.
had finally
Who poured
crystallized.
it?
The way a solution will
know.
crystallize when
And
the
you,
correct
monsieur?
element is introduced.
Your hand was on the pot.
This figure was not
It was
moving,
not I.
was barely breathing, had the look of someone watching the floor open beneath them slowly and finding that they had always, somewhere very deep, known it would. Poirot watched. He watched with the sad, certain eyes of a man who has assembled a truth he did not enjoy assembling. There was no satisfaction on his face, and this, more than anything else, was what made the room feel so irreversible. If there had been triumph, the others might have resented it, might have found somewhere to place their discomfort. But Poirot's expression
The
offered
victim
them
was
nothing
seated
of
here,
the sort.
unmoving.
He looked only as he had
He
looked
reached for the glass,
in some
a
unguarded
moment of
moment on the
hesitation.
second day, when he had
Locked,
stood at a window
as I
very
suspected.
early in the morning and watched the street
truth.
below with an expression
Poirot
that his
has known
companion
since the second day.
then had not known how to interpret. Now they would have known. It was grief of a precise and professional variety.
Grief is a
The grief
curious
of a man
thing.
who loves
It
the truth and
exposes
does
what we
not always
hide.
love what the
What
truth
are you implying,
contains.
Monsieur Poirot?
The clock on the
The one who
mantelpiece
feigns
ticked.
mourning the loudest
Outside,
often has the
a
most
motor
to
car
conceal.
passed on the wet street. Somewhere in the house, in the kitchen perhaps, where the ordinary business of living had not yet learned to stop, a cup was set down in a saucer. The 6 people in the room would remember this moment differently. This is always the way. Memory is not a recording. It is a selection, and we select according to what we can bear. One of them would remember the fire. One would remember the precise sound of that scraping chair, would hear it sometimes years later, at unexpected moments, while reading, while falling asleep. One would remember Poirot's hands, still at his sides, perfectly still, and wonder at them. The one who had planned it would remember the smell of the room.
Human
beeswax
nature,
and
my
old
friends,
books
is a
and the
curious
faint cold
thing.
trace
It
of a winter
conceals
that had
dark
not yet
truths.
decided to end.
And the mind, when
Strange the
burdened
things
by
that
guilt,
stay.
finds it difficult
Strange
to
the
remain
things that
fast
go.
in the smallest
But
of
that
gestures.
is not where this story begins. Stories of this kind, the kind that end in lamplit rooms with someone's world collapsing silently inward, do not truly begin where they appear to begin. They begin earlier, much earlier. In arguments heard through walls, in letters hidden in the back of desk drawers, in the precise moment when a human being standing alone in a quiet room
It is a
makes
pleasure to
decision
make your
that cannot be
acquaintance.
unmade.
The pleasure is mine,
We
Mr.
will get
Poirot.
there. But
I
first,
understand
this
you
room,
have an intriguing
this
tale to
stillness,
share.
the amber
One
fire
that
and the
demands the
ticking
utmost
clock and 6
discretion.
people arranging their faces around
The
an
arm of
event
the
that
chair
has already
conceals
happened.
much, but not from
And
these eyes.
Poirot at the center watching,
The
waiting
invisible
perhaps for someone
becomes
to speak.
visible.
No one does.
A story in
7
the
days
skin of the
earlier,
wood.
no one in this room
Human
had
nature,
imagined
my
it would end
friends,
this
is a
way,
labyrinth of
including the
contradictions.
person who planned it.
Beneath surface of subtlety,
The question this
darker
section leaves,
impulses often
how did
lurk.
we arrive here, and who is
Do you not
standing by
agree?
the cold radiator?
Pleasure to make your
The
acquaintance.
room Poirot had been given
The
for
pleasure
his
is all
use
mine,
was
Monsieur
small
Poirot.
and south-facing,
I trust
which
your
meant
journey
that
was
in
agreeable?
afternoons
Quite.
it received
The
what
surroundings are
winter-like
most
London was
intriguing.
willing to offer.
I
A
sit
pale,
alone in the
watery
dark,
illumination
replaying
that
the
came
plan.
in at a low angle
The moonlight
and laid
reveals
itself
my
across the
trimming hand.
desk like something
The
exhausted
fire's
from
glow
the
mirrors the shuttle
journey
line.
he
I
had
cannot
arranged the
escape
desk
it.
himself on the first morning. The household had provided it in a condition of cheerful disorder. Inkstand to the left, blotter askew, a letter rack tilted at an angle that had troubled him immediately
Now,
and
let us see
continued to
what
trouble him.
secrets you hold.
In the way that small wrongnesses do when
yes,
one's
the
mind is
invisible
otherwise
become
occupied
visible.
with large ones. He had spent 4 minutes setting things right
Now,
before
let us
he
see
could
what
begin to think.
secrets you hold.
His assistant, had one been present,
yes,
would have
the
recognized this.
invisible become
The straightening
visible.
of objects was not displacement, it was preparation. The mind, Poirot had long maintained, cannot function with perfect clarity inside a crooked frame. Now, on the 7th day, he sat at the desk that was exactly as he
Regardez les
required
mains
it,
du
and he
sujet
was
dans ce
very still.
portrait.
In
Observez comme
front
elles
of him
sont
lay 3
crispées.
things. The
Elles
first was
trahissent
a
une
letter.
peur profonde, une
It had
terreur
been
cachée
written
dans
on
l'âme.
cream-colored
La
stationery,
vérité se lit dans ses
the kind
détails.
that cost slightly more than is strictly necessary, in a hand that was precise and leftward slanting, and had been once rather elegant. The elegance had cracked under the pressure of what was being said.
Reginald Ashbury, you are
Certain
under
words had
arrest.
been pressed into the
This is
paper more
absurd.
firmly than
On what
others.
grounds? Conspiracy
Certain
and
lines
fraud.
had
Hands
been
behind your
written
back.
and then
You can't
not
do this
crossed
to
out,
me.
which would have been visible, simply written over, the same phrase repeated with minute variation, as though the writer had been searching for an exact truth and settling, ultimately, for an approximate one. Poirot had read this letter 11 times. He read it now for the 12th, and the 12th time confirmed what the 11th had confirmed and the 10th before that.
Human nature,
That the
mes
truth
amis,
was
is a
not in
most
what the letter
curious thing.
said, but
It
in the
compels
3
one to act
things
against one's own
it did not say,
interests.
and in the precise location
And
of
the
those
eyes,
silences
they
he set
reveal
it
what
down.
the lips
The
will
second
not.
object was a button, small,
I sit alone,
black,
replaying it in
the
my
kind
mind.
used on a gentleman's
The
evening
silence
coat,
of the library
moderately
echoes my
expensive,
thoughts.
moderately distinctive,
My hands
with a
betray the
small
fear
anchor
I hide.
motif pressed into its face that would be invisible at any conversational distance. Poirot had found it on the morning of the 2nd day, in a location that the police had examined and pronounced uninteresting.
Reginald
He had
Ashbury,
not
you
at
are
the
under
time
arrest.
told them
No,
what he thought
this
of
is a
their
mistake.
pronouncement.
And hand it by
He had simply
now,
put the button in
deuce.
his waistcoat pocket, where it had lived for 5 days as a small, hard fact waiting for the other facts to arrange themselves around it. They had now arranged themselves. The button was the last piece, or rather, and this was the distinction that mattered. It was not the last piece, but the piece that confirmed the arrangement of all the others. A picture does not require every tile to be comprehensible.
Observe the
It
hands,
requires
so
enough.
tightly
Poirot
clasped,
now had
a
enough.
classic sign of fear,
He had had
hidden
enough
from the
if he
world.
was honest with himself.
This person lived in
And
terror of a
Poirot
secret
was, in
being
the
revealed.
privacy of his own
It is
mind,
written here,
always
plain as
honest with
day.
himself, since the previous
Every
evening.
detail of the murder replays
Since
in my
midnight,
mind.
precisely,
Tonight,
when a
reversing
connection
our
had
blood,
surfaced
chasse
from
me to
whatever
my
depth his sleeping mind operated at, and he had lain in the dark with his eyes
This
open,
letter from Gerald
and the
Ashbury
connection
changes
growing
everything.
clearer and more
He hid it inside the
terrible
east
with
wall
every passing
alcove.
minute. He had hoped
No one
for
else must
approximately
know.
half an hour that he was wrong. He had known by midnight that he was not. The third object was a small notebook, his own, the kind he had carried for 30 years in various cities and various cases. The current page contained 11 words arranged in a column, each one the name of a person in this house or connected to it. Beside 9 of the names, he had made small notations, a date, a phrase, a question mark that had since been answered. Beside one name, he had written nothing at all for 5 days. This morning, he had written 2 words beside it. He looked at those 2 words for a
You were
long
manipulating
moment.
me this
Then he
whole
closed
time.
the notebook. He rose from the
Indeed,
desk and went to the window.
The game is over.
Baker Street was carrying on below him in the manner of Baker
You thought
Street.
you could hide this?
Cabs and
I
pedestrians
know
and
everything.
a man
What is
selling
that?
something
Where did
from
you
a
get
cart
it?
who had
The
been in the
details
same
don't matter.
position
You will
since
do as I
Tuesday and
say,
showed no
or this goes
signs
public.
of considering any other position. The ordinary world. The world that did not know about the letter and the button and the 11 names in the notebook. Poirot watched it for a moment with something that was
I
not
must appear
quite
innocent,
envy but shared certain
unaware of any
characteristics
guilt.
with envy. A
My hands
recognition
thin
that
now.
there was a
Poirot's
mode of
gaze misses
existence
nothing.
from which he was, by
Innocent.
nature and
I am innocent.
by vocation,
The
permanently
poison was in the
excluded.
cup.
The mode of
Who
not
poured it?
knowing,
I
of moving through
don't
an
know.
afternoon without the weight
you,
of
monsieur?
assembled truth.
Your
He
hand
had
was on the
chosen
pot.
otherwise many years ago.
It was not I.
He did not precisely regret it. He turned from the window. There were preparations to be made, not dramatic ones, not the kind that involve secret telegrams and hidden constables at the doors, though Poirot was not philosophically opposed to these where necessary. What was required here was simpler and in some ways more demanding. What was required was the arrangement of truth in a sequence that would be undeniable, that would, piece by piece, remove every exit until only one remained, and the person standing in that corner
The victim was
would have
seated
nowhere
here,
left to go.
unmoving.
He was not cruel by nature. He
He
did
reached
not
for the
enjoy
glass.
corners.
A moment of hesitation.
But there were 7 days of this house
Locked,
inside him now.
as I
7
suspected.
days of watchings and listening
The
and
truth.
sitting very quietly
Poirot
while
has
people
known
told him
since the
things they
second day.
intended to tell him, and more importantly, things they did not. And the truth had assembled itself, and it
Grief
was not
is
the
a
kind of
curious
truth
thing.
that could be left
It exposes
unspoken.
what we hide.
Someone had
What are
been
you
killed.
implying, Monsieur Poirot?
Someone
one
quiet
who
and
feigns mourning
particular,
the loudest
and
often
known
has
to
the
many
most to
people in this
conceal.
house in different ways, depending on what they needed from the knowing. That person was gone, and the person who had taken them deserved at minimum to be seen. Poirot believed in being seen. He believed in it with a conviction that was almost liturgical. He crossed to the small table beside the window where a telephone had been installed. Reluctantly, one sensed, by a household that still considered the instrument faintly disruptive. He lifted the receiver, asked when connected to be put through to the downstairs sitting room, waited. When the voice answered, cautious, controlled, the voice of someone who had spent 7 days monitoring the tenor of every communication directed at them, Poirot spoke
Human
pleasantly.
nature, my friends, is a
I
curious
wonder
thing.
if you would be
it
so
conceals
kind,
dark
he said,
truths.
as to ask everyone to gather
And the
this
mind,
evening
when
in the
burdened
study,
by
I
guilt,
think.
finds it
Shall we
difficult
say
to
9
remain
o'clock?
fess in the
A
smallest
pause.
of gestures.
Everyone, the voice said. Everyone, Poirot said. He set down the receiver. He stood for a moment looking at the telephone with an expression that might, in a different man, have been described as reluctance. In Poirot, it was more precisely calibrated than that. It was the expression of a man who is about to do something that is entirely necessary and not
It is a
remotely
pleasure to make your
pleasant,
acquaintance.
and who has made his peace
pleasure
with
is
the
mine, Mr.
distinction
Poirot.
between the two.
I understand
He
you have an
returned to the
intriguing
desk,
tale to share.
straightened the
One that demands
inkstand
the
which had
utmost
shifted a
discretion.
1/4 inch during his time at the window.
The arm of the chair
opened the
conceals
notebook
much,
to its
but not from
last
these
page.
eyes.
Read the 2 words he had
the
written that
invisible
morning.
becomes visible.
Then he sat down to
A
wait for
story
9
in the
o'clock.
skin of the wood.
What had led
Human
him
nature,
here,
my
what
friends,
had
is a
broken the case
labyrinth of
open 4 days
contradictions.
ago in a way he had not
Beneath surface
recognized
of
until much
scintillatory,
later, had
darker
begun with a
impulses often
conversation he
lurk.
had not intended to have.
Do you not agree?
A conversation
to
in a
make your
hallway
acquaintance.
between himself and a
pleasure
person he
is
had
all
at
mine,
that
Monsieur
point
Poirot.
largely
I
discounted.
trust your journey was agreeable.
A conversation in which the
Right.
important
The
thing was
surroundings
not
are
what
most
was said,
intriguing.
but the slight, almost
sit alone in the
imperceptible
dark,
hesitation that
replaying the
preceded
plan.
one particular word.
The moonlight
He had
reveals
not
my
registered
trembling
it
hands.
fully at the time.
The fire's glow mirrors
The little
shadow
grey
in
cells,
life.
he
I cannot
sometimes
escape
thought,
it.
were considerate in this way. They did not always share their conclusions immediately. They waited until you were ready to hear them. 4 days ago, in that hallway, they had heard something they
Now,
would not
let us
share
see
with
what
him until
secrets you
midnight on the
hold.
6th day. 4 days ago,
Ah, yes,
everything
the
that mattered had
invisible
been set in
become
motion,
visible.
or rather, the thing that had been set in motion much
Now,
earlier
let
had
us see
finally
what
become
secrets
visible,
you hold.
the way a ripple becomes visible only when
Ah,
it
yes, the
reaches the
invisible
shore.
becomes visible.
What happened 4 days ago is the question the next section answers, but that is not the next section. First, we must go back further still, back to the morning when the house woke to find that it had become a house of a particular and irreversible
Regardez
kind.
les mains du
Back
sujet
to
dans
day
ce
one.
portrait. Observez comme
Back
elles sont
to the
crispées.
beginning that was already
Elles
the
trahissent
middle
une
of
peur
something
profonde,
else.
une terreur cachée dans
The
l'âme.
housemaid's name was
La
Dora
vérité se lit
Fenn,
dans ces
and she had
détails.
worked in the house on Baker Street for 11 years, and she had never, in 11 years, had cause to scream. She screamed once. A single sound, short, sharp, bitten off almost immediately. as though
Reginald
some
Ashbury, you are
secondary
under
instinct
arrest.
had recognized
This
that
is
screaming was
absurd.
something
On
that
what
once
grounds?
begun
Conspiracy
required a
and fraud.
decision
Hands
about
behind
when
your
to
back.
stop.
You can't do
And
this
she
to
was
me.
not yet capable of that decision, so she stopped it herself, there in the doorway of the study, with her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes doing the work her voice had abandoned. Then she went downstairs and told Mrs. Alderton, the housekeeper, who told her to sit down and have some tea, which Dora did not do because her legs would not cooperate with sitting. And then Mrs.
Human nature, mes amis,
Alderton,
is a
who had
most
the kind
curious
of
thing.
practical nature
It
that
compels
reveals
one to act
itself
against
most
one's
fully
own
in
interests.
emergencies, went upstairs
And the
herself to
eyes,
see.
they reveal what
She
the
came
lips
back
will
down
not.
in a different manner than she had gone up.
I sit alone,
She sat down.
replaying it in my mind.
She had some tea. Then
The
she sent
silence
for
of the
police.
library echoes my
The
thoughts.
study, by the time Inspector
My hands
Crail and
betray
his
the fear
sergeant
I
arrived
hide.
at 8:30, had already been compromised in 4 distinct ways that would have made Hercule Poirot, had he been present, close. His eyes briefly and breathe with great deliberateness through his nose. Mrs.
Reginald
Alderton had
Ashbury, you
entered
are
the
under
room to
arrest.
confirm what
No,
Dora had
this
seen.
is a mistake.
This was the first
Panty
compromise.
bited duck.
Mr.
Now, deuce.
Reginald Fortescue, the victim's nephew, 26 years old, sandy-haired, with the kind of anxious energy that expresses itself in constant small movements, had been informed and had gone upstairs immediately to see for himself, despite Mrs. Alderton telling him quite clearly that he should not. This was the second compromise. Someone, it was never satisfactorily established who,
Observe
this
the hands,
ambiguity would
so
later
tightly
acquire
clasped,
significance,
the classic sign
had
of
opened
fear
the study
hidden
window,
from the world.
admitting a column
This
of
person
cold
lived in terror
February
of a
air
secret
that
being
dissipated.
revealed. It is written
Whatever
here,
olfactory
plain as day.
information the room might have offered.
Every
This was
detail of the
third.
murder replays in my mind.
And a small writing table
Tonight,
near the door,
reversing up
on which
assessment
certain
of my
objects
market.
had presumably rested in an arrangement that meant something had been nudged.
This letter from
Perhaps by
Gerald
a
Ashbury
passing
changes
elbow,
everything.
Perhaps by the hem of
He
a
hid it inside the east
coat,
wall alcove.
so that whatever arrangement
No
had
one else
existed
must
was
know.
now a different arrangement, and the difference was unrecoverable. This was the fourth, and in Poirot's private assessment, the most consequential. Inspector Crail was not a stupid man. He was, however, a man whose relationship with evidence was essentially competitive. He approached a crime scene the way a terrier approaches a suspicious rustling in the hedgerow, with great confidence and considerable disruption. He had solved 17 cases in his career, a number he cited with frequency, and a number that Poirot, upon being told it later, had received with an expression of such perfect
You were
diplomatic
manipulating me this
neutrality
whole time.
that it communicated everything.
Indeed. The game
Crail's
is over.
sergeant, a young man named Briggs, who was in the early
You thought you
stages
could
of
hide
learning
this?
that his instincts were
I know
better than
everything.
his
What is
superiors,
that? Where did you get
and
it?
the later
The
stages
details
of
don't
learning that
matter.
this
You will
knowledge
do
was
as I say, or this
professionally
goes public.
inconvenient. Took notes. He was very thorough. He noted the position of the body, the condition of the room, the absence of signs of forced entry. He noted the glass on the desk, crystal, heavy, a finger's
must
worth
appear
of whiskey
innocent,
remaining in it,
unaware
and the
of any
faint
guilt.
circular watermark beside
My
it that
hands stay now.
suggested a
Poirot's
second
gaze
glass had
misses
stood
nothing.
there and been removed.
Innocent.
He
I
noted
am
this last
innocent.
detail with a small star
The
in his
poison
margin.
was in the cup.
He did not show
poured
Inspector
it?
Crail the star. The body
I don't
was that
know.
of Mr. Edmund
And
Ashworth,
you, monsieur?
aged 58.
Your hand was on the pot.
He had been, by all
was not
available
I.
accounts, a man of considerable and complicated presence. The kind of man about whom people expressed strong opinions and then looked slightly uncomfortable, as though the strength of the opinion had revealed something about themselves they had not intended to share. He had been a solicitor once in a distinguished firm and was no longer, for reasons that different people in the house summarized differently. He had money, not the inherited kind which is quiet, but the made kind which tends to announce itself. He had opinions
The victim
on
was
most
seated
subjects
here,
and expressed them.
unmoving.
He had, over
He reached for
58
the
years,
glass.
accumulated
A moment
both
of hesitation.
admirers and enemies with apparently
Locked,
equal effort and
as I
perhaps equal
suspected.
satisfaction. He was
truth.
lying now in his leather
Poirot
chair,
has known
the one
since the
behind the
second
desk,
day.
the chair that was unmistakably his, that bore the impressions of his particular way of occupying space, with his head
Grief is a
tilted
curious
slightly.
thing. It
Back and
exposes
his
what we
hands
hide.
resting on the
What are you
chair's arms
implying,
in an
Monsieur
attitude
Poirot?
that was, from a
The one who
distance,
feigns mourning
almost
the loudest
peaceful,
often has the most to
as though he
conceal.
had simply stopped mid-thought, and whatever mechanism maintained him had quietly concluded its work. He did not look peaceful from closer, but we need not linger there. They assembled in the downstairs sitting room by 10 o'clock, the people of the house and the people connected to it, drawn together by the specific gravity of violent death. There was Mrs. Vivian Ashworth, the victim's wife, 54 years old, still handsome in the way of women who have always understood that handsome is more durable than beautiful. She sat in the chair nearest the window, her chair it appeared, the one she customarily occupied, with her hands folded and her face arranged in an expression of shock that was entirely
Human
appropriate
nature, my friends, is a
and
curious
entirely
thing. It
correct, and
conceals
which
dark
several
truths.
people in the room found,
And the mind,
for
when
reasons
burdened by
they could
guilt,
not
finds it
immediately
difficult to remain
articulate,
fess in the
slightly
smallest
too
of
correct.
gestures.
There was Reginald Fortescue, the nephew, who could not be still. He stood and sat and stood again. He asked Inspector Crail questions that Crail answered with the brusque patience of a man who prefers asking to answering. His distress appeared genuine, appeared being a word that in this room on this morning carried more weight than usual. There was Miss Clara Tate, 38, who served as Ashworth's secretary, and had done so for 6 years, and who had discovered, upon arriving at the house that morning at her customary hour of 8:15, that the world she had arrived to navigate no longer existed in its previous form. She was pale. She held a cup of tea with both hands. Her
Human
eyes
nature,
moved
my friends, is a
occasionally
labyrinth
to the
of
window,
contradictions.
not to the street
Beneath
outside,
surface
but
of
to the middle
symphony,
distance,
darker
the unfocused
impulses
zone
often
people
lurk.
look at when they are
Do you
reviewing
not agree?
something internally that
Pleasure
they are
to
not
make your acquaintance.
prepared to share
The pleasure is all
externally.
mine, Monsieur
There was
Poirot.
Mr. Leonard Craig,
I trust your
45,
journey was
an
agreeable?
architect of some reputation who
Right.
occupied the
The
first
surroundings
floor
are most
rooms as a
intriguing.
lodger, and had done so
I
for
sit
3
alone
years.
in the dark,
He
replaying
had the quality,
plan.
unnerving
The
in the
moonlight reveals
circumstances,
my trembling
of
hands.
appearing genuinely
The
calm,
fire's glow
not the
mirrors the show
performative
in my
calm
eye. I
of
cannot
someone
escape
suppressing
it.
agitation, but the structural calm of a man whose relationship with catastrophe was, for some reason, one of familiarity. He answered Crail's preliminary questions in full sentences, with dates
Now,
and
let us see
times,
what
without being
secrets
asked
you
for them.
hold.
There was Dr. Helena Marsh,
Ah,
51,
yes, the
who had been
invisible
Ashworth's
become
physician
visible.
for a decade, and had arrived within 20 minutes of being
Now,
telephoned,
let us see what
which was
secrets you
efficient,
hold.
and who had examined the body with a
Ah, yes,
thoroughness
the
that made Briggs
invisible
put
become
down his
visible.
pen and look out the window, and who had then come downstairs and told Inspector Crail, in the particular tone of a woman delivering a verdict she is not surprised to be delivering, that Edmund Ashworth had been poisoned.
Regardez les mains
And
du
there was
sujet dans
one
ce
more,
portrait.
sitting
Observez comme elles sont
slightly
crispées.
apart from the others,
Elles
in the
trahissent une
chair
peur
nearest the
profonde, une
cold
terreur
fireplace,
cachée dans l'âme.
with a quality of
La vérité
stillness
se lit
that
dans
was
ces
different
détails.
from the others' stillness. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of performance. The stillness of someone who has arrived at a moment they have, in some form, been anticipating, and is now
Reginald
engaged
Ashbury,
in the
you are
careful,
under arrest.
necessary work of
This is
reacting to it
absurd!
correctly.
On what grounds?
We will not
Conspiracy
yet
and
name
fraud.
this
Hands behind
person.
your back.
We have
You
already
can't
seen their
do
face
this
in a
to me!
lamplit room on the 7th day, when everything was over. We have seen what that face looked like when Poirot was finished speaking. What we see now on the first morning is the face before, the face that does not yet know it will be known. It is, if one is looking carefully, and most people in that room were too occupied with their own grief and their own fear to look carefully.
Human
Not
nature,
quite
mes
right.
amis, is a
The
most
eyes too
curious thing.
controlled.
It compels
The
one to
breathing
act
too
against
measured.
one's own
The
interests.
reaction to each new development,
And the
each
eyes,
question
they
from
reveal
Crail,
what the lips
each
will
word
not.
from Dr. Marsh,
I sit
arriving
alone,
a half beat
replaying
after
it
it
in my
would arrive
mind.
naturally, as though
The silence of
processed
the library
rather than
echoes
felt.
my thoughts.
Most people in that room were
My
not
hands
looking
betray the
carefully,
fear I
but
hide.
then Poirot was not yet in that room. It was Reginald Fortescue who said it. Finally, around 11 o'clock, when the initial storm of Crail's questions had passed and the room had settled into the particular
Reginald
exhaustion
Ashbury,
that
you are
follows.
under arrest. No!
Catastrophes
This is a
burst out.
mistake!
There is a man in London, he said.
Now,
He
do
said it to no one in particular, or perhaps to the room, which amounts to the same thing. A Belgian fellow. My friend Hastings mentioned him once. Said he was extraordinary, that he understood these things. Mrs. Alderton, who had appeared in the doorway with more tea that no one would drink, looked up. Poirot, said Dr. Marsh, with the tone of someone producing a word they have had cause to use before. Poirot, yes.
Observe the
She looked
hands,
at
so
Vivienne
tightly
Ashworth.
clasped, a
It
classic
might
sign
be
of
worth
fear,
sending for
hidden
him,
from the
Mrs.
world.
Ashworth
This person lived in
considered
terror of a
this for a
secret being
moment.
revealed.
Then she
It is
nodded
written here,
once,
plain as
with
day.
the decisive quality of a woman who
Every
has learned to
detail
make
of the murder
decisions in
replays in
rooms
my
that
mind.
expect her not to.
Tonight,
Send for
reverse
him,
an
she
upright
said.
assessment to my
What
wife.
no one in that room knew, what no one could have known, was that across the room,
This letter
in the
from
chair
Gerald
nearest
Ashbury
the
changes
cold
everything.
fireplace, something
He
shifted,
hid it inside the
barely
east wall
perceptible.
alcove.
A
No one
fraction
else
of
must know.
adjustment, the way a person adjusts when they have received information that requires recalibration, gone in an instant, replaced immediately by the correct expression. But it had been there. And 7 days later, when Poirot stood at the center of the study and assembled every piece of this in front of the people who had been present for it, he would say, "The first error was the one you made before I arrived, before you knew there was anyone to make errors for." And in the chair nearest the cold radiator, someone would become very still. 7 days earlier, no one had imagined it would end this way.
You were manipulating me this whole
4 days
time.
before the crime, the house had been
Indeed.
different. Warmer,
The game
perhaps,
is over.
in the way houses are warm when death has not yet moved into them.
You thought you could
The
hide
victim
this?
had been alive
I
and
know
arguing
everything.
and
What is
watching
that? Where did
and
you
being
get it?
watched.
The details
seeds
don't
that
matter.
Poirot
You will
would
do
harvest
as
on
I
day
say,
7 had
or
been
this goes
planted
public.
then. We must go back further still to see them go into the ground. The morning began ordinarily. This is almost always the case. The extraordinary arrives wearing the clothes of the ordinary. It
I
comes
must
in
appear
with the
innocent,
post. It sits
unaware
down
of
at the
any
breakfast
guilt.
table. It passes
My
you in the
hands sting
hallway
now.
with a
Poirot's
perfectly
gaze misses
unremarkable
nothing.
expression. And you
Innocent.
do not
I
know,
am
cannot
innocent.
know, that you are already
The poison
inside
was in
it.
the cup.
That the day
Who
you are
poured
living
it?
has already been
I
chosen
don't know.
by someone for
And
a
you,
purpose
monsieur?
you would not
Your hand
survive
was on the
learning
pot.
at breakfast.
It was not I.
Edmund Ashworth came down at 8 o'clock, as he always did. He was a punctual man, punctuality being one of those qualities that can belong equally to the virtuous and the tyrannical, and in Ashworth's case belonged, as most of his qualities did, to some complicated territory between the two. He wore a dark suit. He had shaved with his customary precision. He carried under his arm a leather document wallet that he set beside his plate without opening, as though its proximity at breakfast was sufficient, as though the documents inside
The
required
victim was
only
seated here,
be near him
unmoving.
to understand what was expected
He
of
reached
them.
for the glass.
Mrs.
A
Ashworth
moment
was
of
already at the
hesitation.
table. She had been there
Locked,
for 20 minutes.
as I suspected.
She was reading a letter,
The
or
truth.
appearing to read it.
Poirot
The
has
page had
known
not
since the
turned in the
second
time
day.
since Ashworth entered, which he did not notice, and which, had he noticed, he would not have considered
Grief is a
significant. They
curious
had been
thing.
married for
It
26
exposes
years.
what we hide.
They had
What are
long
you
since
implying,
arrived
Monsieur
at the
Poirot?
stage of marriage
The
that
one who
outsiders
feigns mourning the
sometimes
loudest
mistake
often
for
has the most to
contentment,
conceal.
and insiders know to be something more complicated. A shared grammar, a set of established distances, a map of which territories belong to whom and are not to be crossed. "Good morning," said Ashworth. "Good morning," said his wife. This exchange had occurred in some form for 26 years. It had not always sounded the way it sounded now. Flat, precise, two people confirming each other's existence without committing to anything further. There had been a time, early, and then occasionally in the middle years, and then less, when the same words had contained something warmer. But the words had remained after the warmth departed, the way furniture remains in a house after the family has gone.
Human nature, my friends, is a
Reginald
curious thing.
Fortescue
It
arrived at
conceals dark
8:30
truths.
and helped
And the
himself
mind,
to
when
eggs
burdened
with the
by guilt,
cheerful
finds it
appetite of
difficult
a
to
young
remain
man
fess
who has
in
not
the
yet
smallest of
learned that there are
gestures.
mornings when cheerful appetite is a social liability. He talked about a motor car he was considering purchasing. Ashworth listened with the expression he used for topics that did not interest him, attentive in posture, absent in the eyes. Mrs. Ashworth did not listen at all, but her performance of listening was considerably more convincing. At 10
is a
o'clock,
pleasure to
Miss
make your
Clara Tate
acquaintance.
arrived and went
The
directly
pleasure
to
is
the
mine,
small
Mr. Poirot.
office adjoining the study.
I understand you have
Her
an
domain,
intriguing tale to
organized
share.
with a thoroughness
One that demands the
reflected
utmost
6
discretion.
years of learning exactly what Ashworth
The arm of the chair conceals
required
much,
and
but
providing
not from
it
these
before he
eyes.
knew he required it. She was good at her
The
work.
invisible becomes
She had
visible.
always been good at
A
her
story
work,
in the skin
in
of
the way
wood.
that people are sometimes
Human
good
nature,
at
my
things
friends,
that
is a labyrinth of
simultaneously sustain and
contradictions.
diminish them,
Beneath
that
surface of
occupy enough of the
Saint-Hilary,
self to
darker
prevent the self
impulses
from
often
asking
lurk.
certain
Do you not
questions.
agree?
She sorted the
pleasure to
morning's
make your
correspondence
acquaintance.
into 3 categories.
The pleasure is all
the
mine, Monsieur
routine,
Poirot.
the requiring
I
attention,
trust your journey was
and the
agreeable.
one envelope she set
Quite.
aside from the others
surroundings
without
are most
quite meaning
intriguing.
to.
I sit
It had
alone in the
arrived 2
dark,
days ago.
replaying
She
the
had not
plan.
given it to Ashworth
The moonlight
immediately.
reveals my
She
trembling
had told
hands.
herself this was because
The
she was
fire's
waiting
glow
for the
mirrors
right
the shadow
moment,
in mine. I
which was
cannot
not
escape
entirely
it.
untrue. The right moment had not yet presented itself. She was beginning to understand that this was because some part of her did not want it to. The letter inside the envelope, she had not read it.
Now, let us see
She was
what
clear about
secrets
this
you
in her own
hold.
mind. She had not read it. She
yes,
had, however,
the invisible
held it up to the
become
light of the
visible.
window on the afternoon it arrived and established,
Now,
from the shadow
let us
of
see
the
what
contents
secrets
visible
you
through the
hold.
paper, that it was approximately 3 pages
yes, the invisible become
long, and that
visible.
certain words recurred with a frequency that told her something about its nature without telling her its specifics. She put it at the bottom of the correspondence pile. She told herself she would give it to him tomorrow. The argument
Regardez les mains
happened
du
at
sujet dans ce
11:30.
portrait. Observez comme elles sont
It came
crispées.
from behind the study door.
Elles trahissent une peur
Ashworth's voice
profonde, une
first,
terreur
then
cachée
another
dans l'âme.
voice, lower and
La
less
vérité
willing
se
to
lit
be
dans
heard
ces
through
détails.
walls, but present nonetheless. Clara, in the adjoining office, did not move. She had learned, over 6 years, that the arguments behind that door were not her business, and that the most professional
Reginald
response
Ashbury,
to
you are
them
under
was
arrest.
to become temporarily
This is
deaf.
absurd!
She could
On what
not
grounds?
entirely become
Conspiracy and
temporarily
fraud.
deaf.
Hands behind your back. You
Ashworth's
can't do
voice,
this to
told
me!
you once and I will not. The other voice, you have no right, Edmund, you have absolutely no. Ashworth again louder. Right is precisely what I have. It is written down. It has always been written down. If you imagined otherwise, that is not my. The other voice dropped below the threshold of Clara's involuntary hearing. There was a pause. Then Ashworth, quieter now,
Human
but with a
nature,
quality
mes
she had
amis,
come
is a
to
most curious
recognize.
thing.
The quietness
It
of a
compels one
man
to
who
act
has found
against
his
one's
firm
own
ground,
interests.
planted himself on it.
And the eyes,
that is
they
my
reveal
final
what
word
the
on the
lips will
matter.
not.
Silence. Then
I sit
footsteps,
alone,
not Ashworth's,
replaying it
which
in
she
my
knew,
mind.
crossing the study.
The
study
silence of
door
the library
opened,
echoes my
closed,
thoughts.
footsteps receding down the
My
hallway.
hands betray the fear
Clara
I
looked
hide.
at the bottom of the correspondence pile, where the letter sat. She would give it to him tomorrow, or the day after. She picked up her pen and returned to the ledger she had been reviewing. At 1 o'clock, Leonard
Reginald
Craig came
Ashbury, you are
downstairs
under
for lunch
arrest.
and found
No,
only Mrs.
this is a
Ashworth
mistake.
in the dining room.
Now,
He had lived in this house for 3 years, and he had learned, as lodgers learn, through proximity and the particular sensitivity that proximity develops, a great deal about the household that he had never been invited to know. He was an architect by training and by instinct, which meant that his understanding of spaces was structural. He understood how rooms related to each other, which walls carried weight and
Observe
which
the
were
hands, so
merely
tightly clasped,
decorative,
a
where
classic
the
sign of
stress
fear
points of a
hidden
building
from the
were
world.
located. He
This
had,
person lived
over
in terror
3
of a secret
years,
being
developed a
revealed. It
corresponding
is written here,
understanding
plain
of
as
the people
day.
in this house.
Every
He knew
detail
where
of the
the
murder
weight was
replays in
carried.
my mind.
He knew which walls were decorative.
Tonight, reverse
He sat
number,
down across
adjustment
from
to my
Mrs.
liking.
Ashworth and unfolded his napkin and said something ordinary
This
about
letter
the
from
weather,
Gerald
which
Ashbury
had turned
changes
cold
everything.
again after 2 days
He
of
hid it
relative
inside the east
mildness.
wall alcove.
Mrs. Ashworth
No
responded
one else
about
must
the
know.
weather. Then she looked at him directly, in the way she rarely looked at anyone directly, and said, "Were you aware, Leonard, that Edmund intends to change the will?" Cray set down his fork with the same careful precision he would later use, 7 days from now, to set down a crystal glass on a bookshelf in a lamplit study. He looked at her. "I was not," he said. "He told Reginald this morning," she said, "or told him enough. Reginald came to me afterward." She looked at her plate. "He was upset. I imagine he was. Edmund believes Reginald has been irresponsible with money, which is not entirely unfair.
You were manipulating me
but the
this
degree
whole
of the
time."
division," she stopped.
Indeed.
She smoothed the
game
tablecloth
is
beside
over.
her plate with 2 fingers, a small, contained gesture.
You thought you
It
could
is more
hide
than
this?
irresponsibility
I
would
know
justify.
everything. What is that? Where did you
I
get
think
it?
it is about
The
something
details
else
don't matter.
entirely.
You will do as I
Cray said
say,
nothing. This was
or
one
this
of his
goes
more
public.
useful qualities. "I think," said Mrs. Ashworth, "that Edmund is punishing someone for something, and Reginald is simply available." She picked up her fork. The subject apparently was closed.
I must
Cray
appear
ate his
innocent,
lunch and said nothing
unaware
and
of any
thought,
guilt.
with the structural
My
precision
hands
of
stay
his
now.
trained
Poirot's
mind
gaze
about
misses
weight-bearing walls. The
Innocent.
afternoon brought
I
a
am
stillness
innocent.
to the house that was not
The
peaceful.
poison was in the cup.
Reginald
poured
Fortescue
it?
did not emerge from
I
his
don't know.
rooms until 3 o'clock.
And you, monsieur?
When he did,
Your hand was
his
on the
eyes
pot.
had the particular quality of
was not
eyes
I.
that have recently been used for something other than seeing. He went to the small drawing room and stood at the window for 20 minutes, watching the street with the unfocused attention of a man whose mind is located somewhere other than his body. At 3:30, Dr. Helena Marsh arrived, not on a medical call, but as a friend which she was to Mrs. Ashworth specifically, in the careful and durable way of women who have known each other long enough to have witnessed each other's private disasters. They took tea in the upstairs sitting room.
The victim was seated
The
here,
door was closed.
unmoving.
Their voices
reached
were
for the
low
glass,
and
a
continuous
moment
and
of
occasionally
hesitation.
interrupted by the particular
Locked,
silence that falls
as I
between two
suspected.
people who have arrived at
The
something
truth.
too large for
Poirot
words
has
and are
known
giving
since
it
the
room.
second day.
When Dr. Marsh left at 5 o'clock, she paused in the front hallway and put on her coat and gloves with great deliberateness.
Grief is a curious thing. It
Alderton,
exposes
passing
what we
through,
hide.
noticed
What
that
are
the
you
doctor's
implying, Mr.
expression had
Poirot?
the quality it
The one who
sometimes
feigns
had after
mourning the
difficult
loudest often has the
consultations.
most to conceal.
Not sad exactly, but resolved. The expression of someone who has assessed a situation honestly and arrived at an honest conclusion, however unwelcome. "Good evening, Mrs. Alderton," said Dr. Marsh. "Good evening, Doctor," said Mrs. Alderton. The doctor left. What she and Mrs. Ashworth had said to each other in that upstairs room with the closed door would not be known for 6 more days. When it was known, it would recontextualize every other conversation in this section, would illuminate it from a different angle. The way a light moved in a room reveals objects that were always present but previously in shadow. Edmund Ashworth spent the afternoon in his study. He was alone. This was, by preference,
Human
his
nature, my
natural
friends, is a
condition,
curious
or
thing.
had become
It conceals
so over
dark
years of
truths.
choosing solitude
And the
until
mind,
the
when
choice
burdened by
calcified
guilt,
into
finds it
character.
difficult to remain fast
He worked
in
through
the smallest of
correspondence,
gestures.
signed documents, made 2 telephone calls, and then sat for a long time doing nothing visible, which in Ashworth's case was not emptiness but its opposite. The concentrated interior activity of a man used to making decisions and currently making one. At 6 o'clock, he opened the leather document wallet he had carried down at breakfast and removed from it a single sheet
It is a
of
pleasure
paper.
to make your
He read
acquaintance.
it, turned it over.
The pleasure is mine, Mr. Poirot.
Read the blank back of it.
I
as
understand
though
you have an
confirming
intriguing
its
tale to
blankness.
share.
Then he
One that
placed it
demands
face
the
down on
utmost
the desk
discretion.
and rested his hand on it, palm
The
flat
arm of the
for a
chair
moment that
conceals
lasted
much, but
slightly
not
too
from
long
these
to be
eyes.
casual. Then he picked up his
the
pen and
invisible
wrote a name at
becomes
the top of
visible.
a fresh sheet.
The story
We will
in the
not
skin
see
of the
what
wood.
followed that name.
Human
not
nature,
yet.
my friends, is a
The
labyrinth
document
of
would be
contradictions.
found by the right person
Beneath surface of
at the right
scintillating
moment 4 days
darker
from now,
impulses
and
often
its
lurk.
existence would confirm
Do you not
something
agree?
that Poirot had suspected
Pleasure to
since
make
the
your
morning of
acquaintance.
day 2,
The
and
pleasure is all mine,
not
Monsieur
yet
Poirot.
prove. What we see
trust
now
your
is only
journey
the
was
pen
agreeable?
moving, the hand that held it.
Quite. The
The man,
surroundings are most
alone in
intriguing.
his study on the last
I
ordinary
sit
evening
alone
of
in
his
the
life,
dark, replaying
writing
the
something
plan.
down with the
The
finality of
moonlight
a man who
reveals my
believes
trembling
that
hands.
writing things down
The
resolves
fire's
them.
glow mirrors the show.
Outside,
I
the
cannot
February
escape
dark
it.
came early, as it always does. The street lamps came on. Somewhere in the house, dinner was being prepared. The smell of it moved through the rooms, something warming, something ordinary. Edmund Ashworth
Now,
kept
let
his
us see
pen.
what
He looked
secrets
at
you
what he had
hold.
written for a long moment. And
Ah,
somewhere
yes,
across the
the
house,
invisible
in a room
become
we have
visible.
already visited, belonging to a person we have already watched,
Now, let
something
us see
happened
what
that was very
secrets you
quiet
hold.
and very private and left no mark on
Ah,
the air.
yes, the
Of
invisible
the long
become visible.
stillness. A window looked at without seeing. And then, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical weight that the word decision implies when we encounter it in stories, simply a thought, arriving in the way that
Regardez
the
les
most
mains du
consequential
sujet dans ce portrait.
thoughts
Observez
always
comme elles sont
arrive
crispées.
quietly, almost gent, wearing the
Elles
face of
trahissent
the
une peur
inevitable.
profonde, une
Yes,
terreur
just
cachée
that.
dans l'âme.
A single syllable
La vérité se lit
unspoken
dans ses
interior,
détails.
lasting perhaps 2 seconds. Yes, this is the only way. And then the thought was gone, or seemed to be gone, absorbed into the ordinary business of the evening, the dressing for dinner, the descent
Reginald
of the stairs,
Ashbury, you are under
the
arrest.
exchange of unremarkable
This is
words
absurd.
over
On what grounds?
meal that everyone
Conspiracy
would
and
later
fraud.
struggle
Hands
to
behind your
remember.
back. You can't
Absorbed
do
so
this to
completely
me.
that the person who had thought it could almost have believed they had not. Almost. But the thought had been thought. And thoughts of that particular kind do not unthink themselves. They go underground and do their work in the dark, and 7 days later they stand in a lamplit room with Hercule Poirot, and there is nowhere left to go. The dinner that evening was, by
Human
all
nature, mes
subsequent
amis,
accounts,
is a most
perfectly
curious thing.
ordinary.
It compels one
Edmund
to act against
Ashworth
one's
ate
own
well
interests.
and spoke about a case he had
And the
followed in the
eyes, they
papers
reveal
and
what the lips
expressed an
will not.
opinion about it that 2 people at the
I
table
sit alone,
disagreed with and
replaying
did
it in
not
my
say
mind.
so.
The
Reginald
silence of the
Fortescue was
library
quiet,
echoes
which was
my
unlike
thoughts.
him, and no one remarked
My
that
hands
Leonard
betray
Cray
the
was his
fear I
customary
hide.
self, measured, present, saying what was required and no more, Mrs. Ashworth served as hostess with the practiced ease of a woman who has run tables through difficult evenings before, and knows
Reginald
that the dinner
Ashbury,
itself,
you are under
the
arrest.
mechanics of it,
No, this
can
is
be
a
made to
mistake.
carry-
And hand
Wait
it by
whatever
Dida.
is not
Now,
being
deuce.
said. Clara Tate was not at dinner. She had gone home at 6, as she always did. She had not given Ashworth the letter. 3 days later, this dinner would be over, and Edmund Ashworth would be dead, and a housemaid named Dora Fenn would scream once in a doorway and stop herself. But we have already seen that morning. What we have not yet seen is what Poirot made of it, how he walked into the ruins of this ordinary
Observe
evening
the
and
hands,
began,
so tightly
with his
clasped,
careful
a classic
melancholy
sign of
intelligence,
fear, hidden
to
from the
understand
world.
what had stood here.
This person lived in
before
terror
the
of a
ruin.
secret being
He
revealed.
arrived on
It
day
is
2.
written here,
He
plain as
arrived as
day.
he always did, knowing nothing.
Every
He would
detail
not
of the
know
murder
nothing for
replays in
long.
my mind.
He came by cab
Tonight,
from
reverse
Waterloo,
Napa,
which was not the
Chesnut to
most
my
direct
liking.
route, but was the route the driver preferred. And Poirot, who had learned
This
over
letter
many
from Gerald
decades that
Ashbury
the
changes
preferences of
everything.
cab drivers,
He
when
hid it inside the east wall
accommodated,
alcove.
produce a quality
No
of
one else
goodwill
must
that
know.
is occasionally useful and never a hindrance, did not object. He sat in the back with his coat buttoned to the throat and his hat precisely positioned and his small gloved hands resting on his knees, and he looked out at London moving past in its winter grey, and he thought about nothing in particular, which was his method of preparation. Some men, arriving at a case, reviewed what they knew. Poirot preferred to arrive empty. The little grey cells performed their best work, he had found, when not cluttered with premature hypothesis. Hypothesis was the enemy of observation. You looked
You
for
were
what you
manipulating me
expected
this
and found
whole
it
time.
or worse, found something else and bent
Indeed.
it unconsciously
The game
to
is
fit.
over.
He had seen it happen to better men than Inspector Cray.
You thought you could hide this?
He had in his earliest
I know
years
everything.
felt the pull
What
of
is
it
that?
himself.
Where did you
now
get
he
it?
arrived
The
empty,
details
a clean
don't matter.
surface,
You will do
ready
as
to
I
receive.
say. or this goes
The cab
public.
stopped in Baker Street and Poirot stepped out and stood for a moment on the pavement, looking at the house. It was a Georgian terrace house, 4 stories, well maintained in the manner of houses whose owners
I must
consider
appear
maintenance a
innocent,
statement rather than
unaware
a
of any guilt.
practicality. The brickwork
My
was
hands stay
clean.
now. Poirot's gaze misses
The window
nothing.
frames were recently painted.
Innocent.
The brass
I am
on the front
innocent.
door was polished to a standard
poison
that
was in the
spoke of
cup.
professional
Who poured
rather
it?
than domestic effort.
I don't know.
A house that presented
you,
itself
monsieur?
carefully.
Your hand
A
was on the
house,
pot.
Poirot thought, with a considered
was not I.
relationship to appearances. He noted this. He noted it the way he noted everything, without conclusion, filing it as a fact that would find its context later or not at all. He rang the bell. Mrs. Alderton admitted him with the particular manner of a housekeeper who has spent the previous 24 hours managing catastrophe, and has now moved into the phase beyond catastrophe, which is a kind of exhausted professionalism. Everything done correctly because correctness is the only available handhold. She took his coat and hat.
The victim
She
was
offered
seated
tea,
here,
which he accepted.
unmoving.
She led him
He
to the
reached for the
sitting room
glass,
and announced
a
him
moment
with
of
a
hesitation.
formality that the circumstances
Locked,
made both slightly
as I
incongruous
suspected.
and entirely right.
The truth.
He stood in the doorway for
Poirot
3
has known
seconds
since the
before
second
entering.
day.
3 seconds to a casual observer is nothing. To Poirot, 3 seconds in a doorway is a considerable amount
Grief
of
is a
time.
curious thing. It
He saw
exposes what
a
we
room
hide.
that had been
What are
arranged,
you
whether
implying,
consciously
Monsieur
or
Poirot?
not, according to an
The one who
invisible
feigns mourning the
geometry of
loudest
allegiance
often
and
has the
distance.
most to conceal.
Mrs. Ashworth at the window. Her window, he would later confirm, the place she consistently occupied. Reginald Fortescue standing near the fireplace, too close to it for the room's actual temperature, suggesting that the proximity to fire was psychological rather than practical. Leonard Cray seated in a chair with his ankles crossed and a newspaper folded in his lap that he had not been reading. The fold was wrong for recent reading. It was the fold of a paper picked up as a prop. And in the corner, in the chair nearest the cold radiator, which was, he noted, the chair furthest from every other person in the room, Miss Clara Tate with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the
Human
middle
nature, my
distance.
friends, is a
3
curious
seconds he
thing.
entered and
It
the room
conceals
rearranged
dark
itself
truths.
slightly to accommodate him.
And the mind, when
And he
burdened by
began.
guilt, finds it difficult
He
to remain
spoke with
fess
each of
in
them
the
in
smallest
turn,
of gestures.
in the manner that appeared conversational and was not. That was in fact as structured and purposeful as a surgical procedure, though considerably more pleasant to experience. He asked about Edmund Ashworth, his habits, his recent mood, his relationships, his work. He asked about the evening of day 0, the night of the crime, with a lightness that made the asking feel
is a
like
pleasure
mere
to make your
formality,
acquaintance.
which it was not.
The
He
pleasure is
listened
mine,
to what
Mr.
they told
Poirot.
him.
I
More
understand you have
carefully,
an
he listened to
intriguing
what
tale
they
to
did
share.
not, Mrs.
One that demands the
Vivian
utmost discretion.
Ashworth spoke about her husband with
The
the
arm of the
measured,
chair
considered
conceals
language
much,
of a
but not
woman
from these
who has had
eyes.
24 hours to determine
The
exactly
invisible
what she will
becomes
say.
visible.
She
A story
described
in
him
the
as a
skin of the
complicated
wood.
man.
Human
She
nature,
used the
my
word
friends,
difficult
is a
once,
labyrinth of
then replaced it
contradictions.
almost immediately with
Beneath
exacting
surface of
as though catching
subtlety,
herself.
darker impulses
She
often
described
lurk.
their marriage in
Do
response
you
to
not
a
agree?
gentle and apparently
Pleasure to
peripheral
make your
question as a
acquaintance.
long one,
The pleasure is all
emphasizing
mine,
the
Monsieur
length,
Poirot.
Poirot noted,
I trust your
rather than
journey
the
was
quality.
agreeable.
When he
Right.
asked whether she
The
knew of
surroundings are
anyone who
most
might wish her
intriguing.
husband harm,
I
she
sit
paused
alone
for a
in the
precisely
dark, replaying
calibrated
the plan.
moment, long enough
The
to
moonlight
suggest
reveals my trembling
consideration,
hands.
short enough to
The
suggest
fire's
that
glow mirrors the show in my eye.
consideration
Cannot
had not
escape
produced
it.
anything, and said she could not think of anyone specifically. She is protecting something, Poirot thought. Whether she is protecting a person or a version of events, I cannot yet say. He smiled pleasantly
Now,
and
let
moved
us
on.
see what secrets you
Reginald
hold.
Fortescue was easier to read, which made him,
Ah,
in a
yes,
different way,
the
harder to
invisible
assess.
become visible.
Easy to read people are not always simple.
Now,
Sometimes
let us
they are
see
people
what
whose
secrets
surface
you hold.
emotions are so genuinely strong that they obscure what
yes,
is
the
beneath, the way
invisible
turbulent
become
water
visible.
obscures the riverbed. His grief appeared real, his distress appeared real. His agitation, the standing, the sitting, the hands that found no comfortable position, appeared entirely real, and Poirot did not
Regardez les
discount
mains
this,
du sujet dans ce
because
portrait.
performed distress
Observez
of
comme
this
elles sont
quality
crispées.
requires
Elles
either
trahissent une peur
extraordinary
profonde,
skill
une
or
terreur
extraordinary
cachée dans l'âme.
practice, and Reginald
vérité se lit
Fortescue
dans ces
showed no
détails.
signs of possessing either. He told Poirot about the argument. He told him with the slight hesitation of a man who has decided that concealment is more suspicious than disclosure, and who has made
Reginald
this decision
Ashbury, you are
correctly.
under arrest.
He
This
said
is
that his uncle had
absurd.
informed
On what
him of an
grounds?
intention to
Conspiracy
revise
and
the
fraud.
will.
Hands behind your back.
He said
You
that
can't
he had
do
been,
this to
he
me.
used the word shocked, then replaced it with concerned, then abandoned both in favor of simply saying that he and his uncle had disagreed, and that it had been unpleasant, and that he wished now, He stopped here, and his jaw tightened in the particular way of young men who will not cry in front of strangers and are currently finding this resolve expensive, that he had
Human
said different
nature, mes
things.
amis, is a
Poirot
most curious
looked at him
thing.
for a moment.
It
You were
compels one
fond
to
of him,
act
he
against
said.
one's
Not
own
a question.
interests.
Fortescue
And the
looked
eyes,
slightly
they reveal
startled,
what
as
the
though
lips will
fondness
not.
for Edmund Ashworth were not the
I
conclusion
sit
most
alone,
people arrived
replaying
at.
it in my mind.
Yes, he said after a
The
moment.
silence of the library
Despite
echoes
yes,
my
Poirot
thoughts.
nodded. He
My
believed
hands
him.
betray the
He
fear
filed
I
the belief
hide.
alongside the grief and the argument and the will and moved on. Leonard Cray was, of the four, the most interesting. Not because he was the most suspicious. He was not, or at least not in any obvious configuration.
Reginald Ashbury,
but
you
because
are
he had
under
a
arrest.
quality that
No,
Poirot
this is a
rarely
mistake.
encountered and always
And
respected.
anti-bandit
He appeared
now,
to be
deuce.
observing the situation at approximately the same level of attention that Poirot was observing it. Most people in the presence of Hercule Poirot either became self-conscious, performing their innocence with a rigor that was itself informative, or became oblivious, so absorbed in their own grief, or fear that they lost track of being watched. Cray did neither. He answered questions with
Observe
the
the
direct
hands,
economy of
so
a man
tightly
who
clasped,
has a
a
structural
classic sign of
understanding
fear
of what
hidden from
questions
the
are
world.
for, and sees
This
no
person lived in
advantage
terrible secret being
ornamentation.
revealed. It
He
is
was
written
precise
here,
about
plain as
times,
day.
dates, what he had seen and
Every
heard.
detail of the
He
murder
made no
replays in my
unprompted
mind.
additions. He mentioned
Tonight,
without
reversing
emphasis
up on
that he had
Chestnut to
heard
my
voices
liking.
in the study on the morning of day -3. He described the
This letter
sound,
from Gerald
not
Ashbury
the words.
changes
He was
everything.
careful to say he had not
He
been
hid it
able to
inside
make
the
out
east
the
wall
words and the
alcove.
approximate duration.
No one else must know.
He said there had been two voices and that one of them was Ashworth's and that the other was. Here he paused, with the particular pause of a man making an accurate statement he would prefer not to make someone else in the household. Poirot did not press him on this. He noted the pause and what it contained. "You are an observant man, Mr. Cray," he said pleasantly. "Occupational habit," said Cray. "Buildings teach you to look at stress." Poirot smiled. He thought about this later, would think about it several times over the following days, and it would mean more each time. And then there was Clara Tate.
You were manipulating me
She
this
was the
whole
last.
time.
And by the time Poirot sat
Indeed.
across from her in the
The game
small
is
office
over.
where she worked, the others had dispersed to their various
You
rooms.
thought you could hide this?
And the house had the
I
quality
know
it would
everything.
have for
What
the
is that? Where did you get
next
it?
several days.
The details
waited,
don't matter. You will
watchful,
do as I
a place
say,
in which sound
or this
traveled
goes
differently
public.
than it had before. She answered his questions carefully. She had clearly prepared for this, not in the way of guilt, but in the way of an organized mind that prefers to approach difficult conversations
I
with
must
its
appear
materials
innocent,
in order.
unaware of any
She
guilt.
described her work, her
My hands
hours,
stay now.
her
Poirot's gaze
relationship
misses
with
nothing.
Ashworth, which she characterized as
Innocent.
professional,
I am
and
innocent.
then added occasionally demanding,
Poison was in the
and
cup.
then looked at the window
Who
in the
poured
way
it?
she had in
I don't
the
know.
sitting room, and
And
he
you, monsieur?
recognized the look now.
Your hand was on the
It
pot.
was not avoidance.
It was
It
not
was the
I.
look of someone keeping something back, not out of guilt, but out of a calculation about what was hers to give. She told him about the morning of day 1, her arrival, the discovery of the situation, the process of the morning. She was accurate and thorough. She did not embellish. He asked if there was anything she thought he should know, anything that had seemed unusual in the days before the death. And she said, after a pause that he measured precisely, "No, nothing that I can think of." It was a truthful answer. It was also Poirot recognized
victim
in
was
the way he
seated here,
recognized such things.
unmoving.
The tiny calibration
He reached
of the
for the
voice,
glass,
the chin lowering
a
a
moment of
fraction,
hesitation.
the hands in the lap becoming
Locked,
momentarily
as
still
I
and then
suspected.
resuming their previous
truth.
position, not the complete
Poirot has
answer.
known
There was
since the
something.
second day.
She had decided it was not hers to give. He did not pursue it. He thanked her and stood and went to collect his coat.
Grief is a curious thing.
He was shown the
It
study
exposes what we
afterward,
hide.
the room
What are you
itself,
implying, Monsieur
which
Poirot?
Inspector Crail
The one
had
who
released
feigns
with the
mourning the
reluctance
loudest
of a
often has the
terrier
most to
leaving a
conceal.
hedgerow, and the assurance that everything of significance had been documented. Poirot moved through it in silence with the small, precise movements of a man in a library who knows exactly which volume he is looking for. He found the circular watermark on the desk. Young Briggs had noted it, which Poirot confirmed by examining the relevant page of the police report he had been provided. 2 glasses, 1 remaining, 1 removed. He found the displaced writing table by the door and spent 90 seconds with it, moving nothing, looking at the angles. He found in the gap between the desk and the wall, a gap of perhaps 4 inches, dark, the kind of place the eye skips over because it contains nothing of visual interest. A
Human
small,
nature,
dark
my friends,
button.
is a curious thing.
He
It
looked at it
conceals
for a
dark
long moment.
truths.
He did not touch
And
it
the mind,
immediately.
when burdened by guilt, finds
He
it
looked at
difficult
it the
to
way
remain
he
fast
looked at
in the
things when they
smallest
were
of
not
gestures.
yet comprehensible but would be. With the patient, courteous attention of a man who knows that significance reveals itself on its own schedule. Then he picked it up, examined it briefly, the anchor motif, the quality of the material, and placed it in his waistcoat pocket. He said nothing about it to anyone. That evening, writing his initial observations in his notebook,
It is a pleasure to make your
he reviewed
acquaintance.
what he had.
The pleasure
5
is mine,
people,
Mr. Poirot.
5 sets of
I understand
information,
you have an
5
intriguing
sets of
tale to
concealment,
share.
5
One that demands
relationships
the
to a
utmost
man who was
discretion.
now dead and who had been evidently
The arm
a
of the
man
chair
around whom
conceals much,
concealment
but
was a
not from
natural
these eyes.
response. He assigned
the
each person a
invisible
provisional
becomes visible.
character, their
The story
likely
in the
role
skin
in the
of the
drama,
wood.
their probable
Human nature,
relationship
my
to the
friends, is a
crime,
labyrinth
the
of
nature and
contradictions.
degree of their connection to
Beneath
whatever had
surface of
occurred.
subtlety,
He was
darker
wrong about
impulses
one of
often
them.
lurk.
Not entirely
not agree?
wrong. His
pleasure
assessment
to
of
make
their
your
character was
acquaintance.
accurate,
The
and his
pleasure is all
assessment
mine,
of
Monsieur
their
Poirot.
relationship to the victim
I trust
was
your journey
accurate,
was agreeable.
and his assessment of their
Quite.
distress as
The
genuine
surroundings are
was
most
accurate.
intriguing.
But his
I sit
conclusion
alone
about
in
their
the dark,
significance,
replaying the plan.
about whether they were,
The
in the
moonlight reveals
architecture
my
of this
trembling
crime,
hands.
a
The
weight-bearing
fire's
wall
glow
or a
mirrors
decorative
the shadow in
partition
mine. I
was
cannot
wrong.
escape it.
He wrote their name in his notebook and made a small notation beside it that indicated peripheral. Observe, but do not prioritize. He would not correct this error until day 6. The error would not
Now,
prove fatal,
let us see what secrets
but it would
you
cost him
hold.
2 days. 2 days during which
Ah,
the case
yes,
had the
the
particular
invisible
quality of a
becomes
solution
visible.
that is fully present but not yet visible, like a shape
Now,
in
let
fog
us
that
see
the
what
eye keeps
secrets
reaching
you
for
hold.
and the hand keeps failing to find.
Ah,
He
yes,
closed the notebook.
invisible becomes
He
visible.
straightened the objects on the desk, the inkstand, the blotter, the letter rack, and then sat for a moment in the lamplight, listening to the house. It was a house that had things to tell him. He was prepared to wait until it told them.
Regardez les mains du
He did
sujet dans
not
ce
know,
portrait.
sitting at that
Observez
desk
comme
on
elles
the
sont
evening of
crispées.
day 2,
Elles
that the most
trahissent une peur
important piece
profonde,
of
une terreur
information he
cachée
would
dans l'âme.
receive had already been
La
given
vérité
to
se lit
him,
dans ses
not
détails.
in the study, not in any of the formal interviews, in the hallway, 3 minutes after he had finished with Clara Tate. A passing remark from a person he had largely set aside, offered with no
Reginald
apparent
Ashbury,
intention
you are
of
under arrest.
significance, and received
This is
by Poirot's
absurd.
conscious
On what
mind as
grounds?
exactly that.
Conspiracy
A
and
passing
fraud. Hands
remark,
behind your back.
unremarkable,
You can't do this
filed
to
and
me.
forgotten. The little grey cells had not forgotten. They were working on it already, in the dark, in the manner of cells that have been doing this work for 30 years, and know that the most important things are always the ones that don't announce themselves. On day 3, Poirot would sit down with one person for a proper interview. In that interview, the answer was waiting.
Human
He would
nature,
not
mes
find
amis,
it
is
for
a most
3 more
curious
days.
thing. It
The
compels
snow
one
had
to act
begun that
against one's
morning,
own interests.
not heavily, not the dramatic
eyes,
snowfall
they
of
reveal
fiction,
what the
but the
lips will
thin,
not.
persistent kind that London
I sit
produces
alone,
in February as though
replaying it in my
rationing it,
mind.
as though committing to
The
snow
silence of the library
fully
echoes
would
my
constitute
thoughts.
an excess of feeling.
My hands betray the
It
fear
settled
I
on the
hide.
sills and the pavements and the cab roofs and lent the street below Poirot's window a quality of muffled patience, as though the city were waiting for something it did not wish to name. Poirot had been awake since 6.
Reginald Ashbury, you are
He had
under arrest.
breakfasted alone.
No,
The
this is a
household
mistake.
rose later now,
And
or appeared
anti-bited
to,
duck. Now,
each person
deuce.
calibrating their public hours according to some private calculus of what could be endured in company and what required solitude. He had found the dining room empty and the sideboard laid and the coffee hot, and he had sat for 40 minutes in the grey morning light and done what he did at this stage of a case. He had let the not analyze move, not arranged it. Let it move.
Observe
way
the
a
hands,
kaleidoscope
so
moves,
tightly clasped,
the pieces
the classic
shifting
sign
against
of
each
fear,
other until a
hidden from the
pattern
world.
briefly cohered
This
and
person
then
lived in terror of a
dissolved and
secret being
cohered
revealed.
again in a
It
different
is written here,
configuration.
plain as day.
The discipline was in the waiting.
Every detail of the
in
murder
not seizing
replays
the
in my
first
mind.
pattern that appeared and
Tonight,
insisting it was the
reversing our
correct one.
assessment to my
By
mind.
8 o'clock, he had formed 3 hypotheses. By 9, he had eliminated
This letter
one.
from Gerald Ashbury
By
changes
10,
everything.
looking at the snow
He
and
hid it
drinking his
inside the
second
east
coffee,
wall alcove.
he had understood that the
No one
remaining
else must
2
know.
were not alternatives but layers, that the surface hypothesis and the deeper hypothesis were both true, and that the crime had been committed in the space between them. He needed one more conversation. He telephoned downstairs and asked if Dr. Marsh might be available. She arrived at 2 o'clock, punctual as he had expected. Punctuality he had observed the previous day when she came to examine the body, being for Dr. Marsh not a courtesy but a discipline, the expression of a mind that considered imprecision a minor form of dishonesty. She wore a dark coat and carried her bag by habit.
You were
as
manipulating me this
physicians
whole
carry their
time.
bags even when no medical attention is
Indeed,
required.
the game
the
is
bag
over.
being an extension of the professional self that it feels
You thought you could
incomplete
hide
to leave
this?
behind.
I know everything.
Alderton
What is
showed
that?
her
Where
to
did
the
you get
small
it?
sitting room
The details
on the first
don't matter.
floor,
You will do
not
as
the
I
main
say,
sitting room,
or this
where
goes
the
public.
household gathered, and the air had the particular density of rooms in which important and painful conversations have recently occurred. The small sitting room was neutral ground, used for morning
must appear
correspondence and occasional guests,
unaware of any guilt.
furnished with 2 chairs
My
and a
hands
low
stay now.
table
Poirot's
and a window
gaze
that
misses
looked not
nothing.
onto the street but into
Innocent. I
narrow
am
side
innocent.
garden where a single bare tree
poison
stood
was
with
in
the
the
stoic
cup.
patience of
Who
bare
poured
trees
it?
in winter.
I
Poirot
don't
was
know.
already there.
And you, monsieur?
He had arranged the
Your
chairs
hand
at
was
an
on the
angle,
pot.
not facing each
was
other
not I.
directly, which could feel adversarial, and not side by side, which could feel evasive, but at approximately 45 degrees, which was the angle he had found over many years at which people spoke most honestly without knowing they were doing so. "Dr. Marsh," he said, rising, "it is most kind of you to come." "I was coming anyway," she said, sitting. Vivienne needed me. She settled her bag beside the chair with the economic movements of a woman who does not waste motion. "I have 20 minutes. 20 minutes, said Poirot pleasantly.
The victim
"Is
was
quite
seated here,
sufficient." He began as
unmoving.
he always began, at a
He reached for
distance
the
from what
glass.
he actually
A
wanted
moment
to
of
know.
hesitation.
He asked about Ashworth
Locked,
as a patient,
as I
general
suspected.
health, recent visits,
The
the
truth.
ordinary medical picture of
Poirot
a man
has
of
known
58
since
in
the
the
second
condition
day.
Ashworth had been in, Doctor. Marsh answered with the careful circumspection of a physician discussing a deceased
Grief is a
patient.
curious thing.
She was
It
informative
exposes
without
what we
being
hide.
specific,
What are you implying,
professional
Monsieur
without
Poirot?
being evasive.
The one who feigns mourning
Ashworth
the
had
loudest
been in
often has the
reasonable
most
health.
to conceal.
He had suffered from occasional elevated blood pressure, not alarming, but monitored. He had visited her surgery 3 weeks prior for a routine consultation. He had been, she said, in good spirits at that visit. Good spirits, Poirot repeated, not challengingly, simply returning the phrase to the air, giving it room. Relatively, said Dr. Marsh. A small revision. She looked at him with eyes that were assessing him as he suspected she assessed most things, clinically, accurately, without sentimentality. He was a man who did not as a rule report his interior state. One inferred, and what did you infer 3 weeks ago? She considered, that he was occupied. Purposefully occupied, which is different from merely
Human
busy.
nature, my friends,
He
is a
had the
curious
quality
thing.
of a man
It
who has
conceals
made a
dark
decision and
truths.
is in the process
And
of
the
acting
mind,
on
when
it.
burdened by
Poirot
guilt, finds it
nodded.
difficult to remain
He
fast
thought about
in
the
the
document
smallest of
wallet,
gestures.
the name written on a fresh sheet of paper, the pen capped with finality. "I see," he said, "and Mrs. Ashworth. You have known her some time, I believe." The shift in subject was smooth, natural, the conversational equivalent of a river finding its next channel. "Doctor." Marsh followed it without apparent awareness that she was being redirected. 22 years, she said.
It is a pleasure to
We
make
met
your
before she
acquaintance.
married Edmund.
The pleasure
she
is mine,
fortunate
Mr.
to have
Poirot.
such a friend.
I understand you
At
have
such
an
a time.
intriguing
Yes.
tale to share.
Something in Dr.
One
Marsh's
that demands
expression
the utmost
adjusted,
discretion.
a minor recalibration,
The arm of
kind
the
that
chair
happens when a
conceals
word
much,
lands
but
closer
not from
to a
these
nerve
eyes.
than the speaker anticipated. Yes,
the
she
invisible
is.
becomes
You visited
visible.
her, I understand,
A
on the
story in
afternoon
the skin of the
he
wood.
named the date.
Human
Day
nature, my
-3, the
friends,
day
is
of
a
the
labyrinth
argument,
of
the day
contradictions.
of the decision.
Beneath
I
surface
did.
of scintillationary,
A call,
darker
she said,
impulses
which was
often
not the
lurk.
same thing, and both of
Do you
them
not
knew
agree?
it. Poirot smiled gently.
Pleasure to make your
Of
acquaintance.
course. He turned
pleasure is all
slightly in
mine,
his
Monsieur
chair
Poirot.
toward the window,
I
towards
trust your
the bare
journey was
tree in
agreeable?
the side garden.
Quite.
It
The
is very
surroundings are
good,
most
he said, with the
intriguing.
air of a man making a
I
general
sit
observation.
alone in the dark,
To have someone
replaying
one
the
can
plan.
speak to honestly.
The moonlight
when the
reveals my
situation at
trim
home
hands.
is complicated. A
The
pause.
fire's glow mirrors the show in
Vivienne's
mine. I
situation.
cannot escape it.
Marsh, with a precision that Poirot recognized as the precision of a woman choosing what to give and giving it exactly, has been complicated for some time. The marriage, among other things. He
Now,
waited.
let
The
us
window,
see what
the tree,
secrets you hold.
the snow that had stopped falling but left its thin residue on
yes,
everything.
the invisible
Edmund,
become
said Dr.
visible.
Marsh, was not a man who forgave easily, or at all perhaps.
Now, let us see
Once
what
he had formed a
secrets you
judgment,
hold.
it became permanent, it became structure. She
Ah,
stopped.
yes,
She
the
looked at her
invisible
hands.
become
That is
visible.
difficult to live alongside. It is, said Poirot. And had he recently formed such a judgment about someone close to him? The pause that followed this question lasted 4 seconds. Poirot counted them. I believe so, she
Regardez
said.
les mains du sujet dans ce portrait.
Though I could not
Observez
say
comme elles
with
sont
certainty
crispées.
about whom.
Elles
It was
trahissent une
at this
peur
point that
profonde,
the
une terreur
conversation
cachée dans l'âme.
shifted,
La
imperceptibly.
vérité se lit dans ces
In the way
détails.
that conversations shift when they have been moving towards something and have arrived at it without the participants quite noting the arrival. Marsh had been reaching into her bag, not for anything
Reginald
specific,
Ashbury, you
the
are under
gesture
arrest.
Of a person whose hands
This is
need minor
absurd.
occupation
On what
while the
grounds?
mind does its
Conspiracy
larger
and
work.
fraud. Hands
And
behind
she
your
said
back.
in the way
You
of
can't
someone
do this to me.
thinking aloud rather than reporting. It is strange, the things that become load-bearing in a long relationship. Things that seemed minor at the time. Yes, said Poirot. Edmund had a particular quality, she said. He remembered everything. Precisely. You could tell him something in passing. Something you had half forgotten yourself, and 5 years later he would produce it.
Human nature, mes
unchanged.
amis, is a most curious
Exact.
thing.
She
It
found what
compels
she
one
had
to
been
act
looking
against
for in the
one's own
bag.
interests.
A small notebook which she did
And
not
the
open.
eyes,
She
they
held it.
reveal what the
It was
lips were
impressive
not.
in a way. And
I
in
sit
another
alone,
way it was.
replaying it in my mind.
Unforgiving, Poirot offered.
The silence of
Yes.
the library
She looked
echoes
at
my
him.
thoughts.
Yes, exactly that.
My hands betray the
Memory
fear
as a
I
form of
hide.
debt collection, Poirot was still. Inside, the little grey cells were doing something. He was not yet sure what. The faintest shift, the way a compass needle shifts before it settles on its direction.
Reginald
So he
Ashbury,
said
you are
carefully,
under
lightly,
arrest.
No!
those who
This is a
had
mistake!
given him material
And
to
hand you
remember,
by did that.
those
Now,
who had told him
deuce.
things perhaps in confidence in better times, were never free of those things. Dr. Marsh, no. She looked at the tree in the garden. I sometimes thought it must be exhausting, being remembered by Edmund. It must, Poirot agreed. A silence, then Dr. Marsh said. And this was the moment, though neither of them knew it then, or rather one of them would not know it for 3 more days. She said, in the tone
Observe
of
the
someone
hands,
closing a
so
subject
tightly
rather
clasped, a classic sign
than
of
opening
fear,
one.
hidden from
Though
the
of
world.
course some people are better
This
at
person
managing
would declare
their
of a secret
histories
being
than
revealed.
others.
It is
At
written
keeping
here,
the past
plain
in
as
the
day.
past. Clara, for instance.
Every detail of the
She
murder
has been with
replays in my
Edmund for
mind.
6 years and remained
Tonight
entirely
reversed my
intact.
blood
I've always
to my
admired that
mind.
in her. Clara Tate, said Poirot. Yes, she has a quality of
This
self-containment.
letter from Gerald Ashbury changes
Whatever
everything.
Edmund knew about her,
He
or
hid
didn't
it
know,
inside
never
the east
seemed to.
wall
She stopped,
alcove.
made a small
No one
gesture.
else must know.
But then, perhaps some people simply have nothing that can be held over them. Perhaps, said Poirot. He smiled. He offered more coffee, which Dr. Marsh declined. They spoke for 4 more minutes about the arrangements for the funeral and the state of Mrs. Ashworth's health and the snow, which appeared to be returning, and then Dr. Marsh collected her bag and stood and said she hoped he would find what he was looking for, with the directness of a woman who respects directness in others. I believe I am finding it, said Poirot. She left. He sat for a long time afterward
You
in
were
the
manipulating
angled
me
chair,
this whole
with the grey
time.
light coming through the window,
Indeed.
and the bare tree standing
game
in
is
the
over.
garden, and the sounds of the house moving around him distantly.
You thought you could hide this?
And he thought about
I
nothing
know
in
everything.
particular.
What is that?
The
Where
little
did you
grey
get it?
cells were
The
working.
details don't matter. You
He
will
could
do
feel
as
it.
I say,
Not as a
or
process
this
he
goes
was
public.
directing, but as one he was hosting. The way a house hosts a fire in its grate, providing the conditions and stepping back. Whatever Edmund knew about her, or didn't know, the phrase had been peripheral, decorative.
I must appear
And
innocent.
aside, the kind of thing said
unaware
in
of
the
any
middle of a
guilt.
longer observation,
My hands
serving
sting
the
out, Poirot's
sentence but
gaze
not
misses
apparently,
nothing.
constituting its meaning.
Innocent.
The
I
little
am
grey
innocent.
cells filed it.
The poison
They
was
would
in the
hold
cup.
it for 3 days.
Who poured it?
In the manner
I
of cells
don't
that have
know.
learned patience.
And you, monsieur?
That have processed
Your hand
enough
was on the
cases
pot.
to understand that a
was
thing
not
heard
I.
on day 3 may not yield its significance until day 6, and that the interval is not wasted time but necessary time, the time required for the surrounding facts to grow into the right shape. He was in his room. He could not sleep. He had been lying in the dark for 2 hours with the particular wakefulness of a mind that has completed a process it has not yet reported to consciousness. And then, between one breath and the next, it was there, whatever Edmund knew about her, not didn't know. The correction had been immediate and instinctive.
The victim was
Doctor.
seated here,
Marsh catching
unmoving.
herself, redirecting,
You
moving
reached
to
for
the
the
safer
glass,
version of
a
what she
moment
had
of
been about to
hesitation.
say, or didn't know,
Locked,
added as an
as
afterthought.
I suspected.
Added to make the previous
truth.
phrase hypothetical rather
Poirot
than
has known
specific.
since the second
But the first
day.
phrase had been specific, whatever Edmund knew about her. Edmund Ashworth, who remembered everything,
Grief is a
who
curious
kept memory
thing.
as a form
It
of debt
exposes what we
collection,
hide.
who had,
What are
3
you
weeks
implying,
before
Monsieur
his
Poirot?
death, been in the
The one who
purposeful
feigns
state of a
mourning the
man
loudest
acting on
often
a
has the
decision
most to
already made.
conceal.
Who had, in his desk, in the document wallet he had carried down to breakfast on day -3 with the proprietary closeness of something important, a document whose nature was not yet known to Poirot, but whose existence he was now, at 11:47 on the 6th night, absolutely certain of, and Clara Tate, who had been with Edmund Ashworth for 6 years and had, according to Dr. Marsh, remained entirely intact, who had self-containment, who had on day 2 answered his questions with the organized thoroughness of a woman whose materials were in order, and who had told him with a pause he had measured that there was nothing she thought he should know. The letter she had not
Human
given
nature, my
Ashworth.
friends, is a curious
The letter
thing.
at the
It
bottom of the
conceals dark
correspondence
truths.
pile, held up
And
to
the
the
mind,
light of
when
the window,
burdened by guilt,
3
finds it
pages
difficult to
long,
remain fess
the
in
shape
the
of
smallest
certain
of gestures.
recurring words visible through the paper. He had known about the letter since day 2. Clara had mentioned it in passing, or nearly mentioned it, beginning a sentence and then redirecting it, and Poirot had noted the redirection and filed it and moved on, because there was too much to hold at once, and the letter had seemed, at that stage, a minor thing. It was not a minor
is a
thing.
pleasure to
He
make
knew
your
what the letter
acquaintance.
contained,
The
not the
pleasure is
specific
mine, Mr.
words.
Poirot.
He had not read it.
I
but its
understand you
nature.
have an intriguing tale to
Its
share.
function.
One that
He
demands the
understood now
utmost
what it was
discretion.
that Edmund Ashworth had known about
The arm
Clara
of the chair
Tate,
conceals
and
much,
had
but
remembered
not from these
in the way
eyes.
he remembered everything, and had been in the
the
process of
invisible
using.
becomes visible.
And he understood
story
what
in the
that
skin
meant
of the
for
wood.
everything else.
Human nature, my
He lay in
friends,
the
is a
dark, and the
labyrinth of
pieces moved and
contradictions.
settled, and the
Beneath
picture that
surface of
emerged was
scintillating,
clear and
darker
complete and
impulses often
terrible in the
lurk.
way that complete pictures
Do you not
sometimes
agree?
are. Not
Pleasure
because
to
they
make
are
your
unexpected,
acquaintance. The
but
pleasure
because
is all
they
mine,
are,
Monsieur
once
Poirot.
seen so entirely
trust
so
your journey was
horribly
agreeable?
inevitable. He had been told the
Quite.
answer on the
The
third day.
surroundings are most intriguing.
Marsh had given it to him
I
in
sit
4
alone in
words
the dark,
passing,
replaying the
correcting
plan.
herself almost
The moonlight
immediately.
reveals my
He had
trembling
simply
hands.
not yet learned the right
The
question.
fire's glow mirrors
He knew
the
now
show
what
in
question
mine.
to
I cannot
ask.
escape it.
And he knew with the certainty of a man who has assembled truth from its scattered pieces exactly what the answer was going to be. He picked up his notebook from the bedside table, opened it to the
Now,
page with the
let us see
11
what
names,
secrets you
found the
hold.
one beside which for 5 days he had written
Ah,
nothing.
yes,
He wrote
the
2
invisible
words. He
becomes
set down the
visible.
notebook. He did not sleep, but he lay still.
Now, let
and the
us see
house was
what
quiet
secrets
around
you
him.
hold.
And somewhere in that quiet house, the person whose
Ah,
name was
yes,
now in his
the
notebook was
invisible
also
become
perhaps
visible.
lying awake. Tomorrow he would make the telephone calls. Tomorrow evening, in the study, with the fire burning and the clock ticking, everything that had been scattered across 7 days would be gathered into one room.
Regardez les mains du
He was
sujet
not
dans ce
looking
portrait.
forward to it.
Observez comme elles sont crispées.
He had never, in
Elles
30
trahissent une
years,
peur
looked forward
profonde,
to
une
it.
terreur cachée
The
dans
house on
l'âme.
Baker Street had
La
been
vérité
standing
se
for
lit dans ses détails.
114 years. In that time it had contained births and deaths and marriages and failures, and at least one significant act of financial dishonesty that its original owners had taken considerable
Reginald
care
Ashbury,
to
you are
ensure
under arrest.
posterity
This
would
is
not
absurd.
discover.
On what
It had
grounds?
been a family home
Conspiracy
and
and
then a divided
fraud. Hands behind
residence
your
and then
back.
a family
You
home
can't
again.
do this to me.
It had survived 2 wars in the way that Georgian terraces survive wars, by being solid and expensive and slightly too inconvenient to demolish. It had absorbed over 114 years the particular accumulated warmth of inhabited space, voices in its walls, footsteps worn into its stairs, the slow darkening of its woodwork from the proximity of so
Human
many
nature,
human
mes
hours.
amis, is
It
a most
had
curious
over
thing.
114
It compels
years
one to
seen a
act
great
against
deal.
one's own interests.
What it saw on the night of
And the
day
eyes,
0,
they
at
reveal
11
what the
o'clock
lips
in the
will
evening
not.
of a February that had turned
I
by
sit
nightfall
alone,
bitterly
replaying
cold.
it in my mind.
This was something it had not
The
seen
silence of
before.
the library echoes my thoughts.
Something that, once contained,
My hands
it would
betray the
carry
fear I
differently than
hide.
it had carried the other things. The way a person carries a specific grief differently than the general weight of years. We will move through the house now, room by room, at the hour of 11. We will move carefully.
Reginald
We will not
Ashbury,
look
you are
directly
under
at the
arrest.
kitchen.
No!
11
This is a
PM,
mistake!
Mrs.
And
Alderton
handy
had
bited
gone to
duck.
bed
Now,
at 10,
douche.
as she always did. The kitchen was empty and orderly, the order of a professional who considers the state in which she leaves a room each evening a matter of personal integrity. The surfaces were clear. The copper pans hung in their sequence. The cold had come in through the gaps around the back door, as it always did in February, and lay along the stone floor in the way cold lies, low, patient, spreading.
Observe
on
the
the kitchen
hands,
table,
so
a
tightly
cup.
clasped. A
Mrs.
classic sign of
Alderton's evening
fear,
cocoa
hidden
cup,
from the
rinsed
world.
and inverted on a cloth
This
to
person
dry.
lived in terror of a
Beside
secret
it,
being
her reading
revealed.
glasses
It is
folded.
written here, plain as day.
A small marker of a life interrupted
Every
by
detail of
sleep
the
and
murder
resumed
replays in my
tomorrow.
mind.
The domestic
Tonight,
archaeology of an
reverse
ordinary
number,
evening.
chassement to my
Nothing
mind.
in the kitchen knew yet what was happening 2 floors above it, or 1
This letter
floor
from
above.
Gerald Ashbury
The
changes
sounds
everything.
of this house traveled strangely.
He hid it inside
Some
the
things
east
heard
wall
everywhere.
alcove.
Some things contained
No one
with
else must
uncanny
know.
precision by the old walls. The kitchen was a place of containment. What happened in the kitchen stayed in the kitchen. What happened elsewhere stayed elsewhere. The first floor landing, 11:03 p.m. The landing was dark. The gas had been turned down, not off, but reduced to the faint blue pilot that served as night lighting, casting the kind of illumination that shows shapes without detail, that turns the familiar into the merely visible. The door to Leonard Cray's rooms was closed. Under it, no light. He had retired at 10:30. She had heard him on the stairs, Mrs.
You were
Alderton,
manipulating me this
before
whole
her own
time.
retirement, and had noted the
Indeed.
time with the automatic
The game is
precision
over.
of a woman who tracks the household's movements as part of her
You
professional
thought you could hide this?
metabolism.
I know
The
everything.
door to the small
What is
sitting
that?
room,
Where did you get
the
it?
one with the
The
angled
details
chairs
don't
and the
matter.
view
You
of
will
the bare
do as I
garden,
say,
was also
or
closed,
this goes
also
public.
dark. On the landing itself, the grandfather clock that stood between the 2 doors, it ticked. It had been ticking for 60 years in this position, and its tick had the quality of long-established
I must
things.
appear innocent.
Not loud, but
unaware
present
of any
in the way
guilt.
that a heartbeat is present,
My hands stay
noticeable
now,
only
Poirot's
in its
gaze misses nothing.
absence, At 11:03 it ticked, at
Innocent. I
11:04
am
it ticked.
innocent.
Nothing on the
The
first
poison
floor
was in the
landing
cup.
moved or
Who
changed or
poured it?
gave any indication
I
that the
don't
world
know.
above it was in the
And you,
process
monsieur?
of irrevocable
Your hand was on the
alteration.
pot.
Leonard Cray's
It
rooms.
was not I.
11:05 p.m. he was asleep. This is verifiable, or as verifiable as the sleep of a single man in a private room can be, which is to say, there is no evidence that he was not, and the evidence that exists suggests that he was. The book on his bedside table was closed with a bookmark at page 237, and Cray was not a man who closed books without marking his place, even temporarily. His jacket was hung with the precision of a man who performs this action consciously, rather than habitually. His shoes were aligned.
The
He
victim
had
was
been,
seated
as
here,
several people would later
unmoving.
attest, the kind of
He reached
sleeper
for the
who
glass,
slept
a
completely,
moment of hesitation.
without the half-consciousness that anxiety produces
as
in
I
light
suspected.
sleepers. He had told
The
Poirot
truth.
on day 2,
Poirot
in
has
response to
known
a
since
question
the
about
second
whether he
day.
had heard anything unusual on the night in question. Nothing. He had heard nothing. He had slept from
Grief is a
10:30 until
curious thing.
6:45,
It
when
exposes
Mrs.
what we
Alderton's
hide.
movements
What are
in
you
the kitchen
implying,
below
Monsieur
had
Poirot?
reached him through the
The
floor
one who
as
feigns
a
mourning the
vague
loudest
domestic
often has the
percussion.
most to
He was
conceal.
telling the truth. He had heard nothing. This was not, as Inspector Crail initially suggested, suspicious. Some people sleep through what others cannot. The house's acoustics were particular. And Cray's rooms were the furthest from the study, separated by 2 floors, a staircase, and the structural mass of the building's central wall. He slept. The book lay closed at page 247. Outside his window, the street was empty. A lamp, a thin frost beginning on the pavement, the ordinary indifference of a city at 11 o'clock. The second floor corridor, 11:07 p.m., 3 doors. The first, Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom, a light under it, faint, the bedside lamp rather than the overhead, the light of
Human
someone
nature,
reading
my
or
friends, is a
attempting to
curious
read.
thing. It
The
conceals
light of
dark
someone who has
truths.
gone to bed without
And the
expecting
mind, when
sleep.
burdened by
The
guilt,
second,
finds it difficult
the guest
to
room
remain fast
currently
in the
occupied by
smallest of
Reginald
gestures.
Fortescue. No light. But and this is the kind of detail that the house registered without being able to report, a quality of non-silence. Not sound, exactly. The opposite of the positive silence of an empty room. The corridor outside his door had the particular quality of a space adjacent to a wakeful person. Something transmitted through walls that is
It is a
not
pleasure
sound
to make
and
your
not light,
acquaintance.
but some third
The
thing.
pleasure
that
is mine, Mr. Poirot.
sensitive register and
I
cannot
understand
name,
you
he
have
was
an
not
intriguing
asleep.
tale to share.
He was
One that
lying in the
demands the
dark,
utmost
in the way
discretion.
that people lie in the dark when
The
their
arm of
thoughts
the
are
chair
too large
conceals
and
much,
too
but
tangled
not
from
from
the
these
mercy
eyes.
of unconsciousness.
Ah,
He had been
the
thinking
invisible
since
becomes
dinner
visible.
about the will.
A story in the
He
skin
had
of the
been
wood.
thinking with the obsessive
Human nature, my
circularity of
friends,
grief
is a
that has not
labyrinth
yet
of
found its
contradictions.
resolution. About
Beneath
the last
surface of
conversation he had
civility,
had with his
darker
uncle,
impulses
the
often
argument,
lurk.
the raised voices.
Do you not agree?
Silence
A pleasure to
afterward.
make your acquaintance.
He had been composing
The pleasure
in his
is all
mind
mine,
the
Monsieur
things he
Poirot.
wished he had said.
I trust your
the
journey
things
was
that were
agreeable.
now permanently unsayable. He
The
had not been
surroundings are most
thinking about
intriguing.
anything else. The
I
third
sit
door,
alone
a
in the
linen
dark,
cupboard,
replaying the
irrelevant.
The
And
moonlight
yet it is
reveals my
mentioned
trembling
because the
hands.
corridor's geography
The fire's
matters,
glow mirrors the
because
shadow
who
in
was
mine. I
where and
cannot
which
escape
doors
it.
were open or closed, and what could be seen from which angle will become, in the next 36 hours, a map that people will argue about, and ultimately, a map that Poirot will read differently from
Now,
everyone
let us
else.
see what secrets you
The second
hold.
floor window, 11:09 p.m. at the end
Ah,
of the
yes,
corridor,
the
a
invisible
window looking
become
onto the
visible.
side passage between this house and the next. At
Now,
11:09,
let
a
us see
figure
what
passed through
secrets
the
you
passage.
hold.
This requires precision.
Ah, yes,
Pass through
the
means
invisible
entered the
become
passage from the
visible.
street end and exited at the rear garden end, or entered from the rear and exited to the street. The direction cannot be established from the window's vantage point alone. The window shows the middle of the passage, not its ends.
Regardez les mains
What
du
can be
sujet dans ce
established?
portrait.
A figure.
Observez comme elles sont crispées.
Moving with the
Elles
particular
trahissent une
quality
peur
of movement
profonde,
that
une
belongs
terreur
to
cachée dans
someone who
l'âme.
is not hurrying,
La
but
vérité
is
se
not
lit dans ses
dawdling
détails.
either. The pace of someone with a destination and a timeline, moving at exactly the speed that the timeline requires. No one in the household reported seeing this figure. This is because no one in
Reginald
the
Ashbury,
household
you are under
was
arrest.
at 11:09
This is
positioned to see
absurd!
this.
On what grounds?
Ashworth
Conspiracy
was reading,
and fraud.
or
Hands behind your
attempting to,
back.
facing
You
away
can't
from the
do
window
this
of her
to
room,
me!
which did not in any case overlook the side passage. Reginald Fortescue was in the dark. Mrs. Alderton was asleep. Leonard Cray was asleep. The figure passed through the passage and was gone. Later, on day 4, during the period of the false arrest, a neighbor would mention, when asked a slightly different question than the one the police had initially asked,
Human
that she
nature,
had seen
mes amis, is a
someone
most curious thing.
in the side passage
It
on
compels
the
one
night
to
in
act against
question.
one's own
She
interests.
described the figure briefly.
And the eyes,
The
they
description was
reveal what the
consistent
lips
with
will
several
not.
people and inconsistent with none.
I sit alone,
Inspector
replaying
Crail
it in my
filed
mind.
this and moved on.
The silence of the
Poirot
library
filed
echoes
this
my
and did not
thoughts.
move on. The third
My
floor, the
hands betray
studio
the fear
to
I hide.
11:17 p.m. We will not enter. Not directly. Not yet. What we know, what the physical evidence established, what Dr. Marsh confirmed, what Poirot assembled from the traces the room offered is that Edmund
Reginald
Ashworth was
Ashbury,
alive
you are
at
under
11
arrest.
o'clock and dead by
No,
half
this is a
past.
mistake.
17
And
minutes
anti-by
at the
did that.
outside,
Now,
probably
deuce.
fewer. What we know further, he was not afraid or had not been afraid for long. The position of the body, back in his chair, hands on the arms, the posture of a man at rest rather than a man who has struggled, suggested either that the end had come quickly or that he had not, until very close to the end, understood what was happening. The latter, Dr. Marsh had indicated, was more consistent with the method.
Observe
with
the
what was in
hands,
the glass.
so tightly clasped.
The second
a classic
glass.
sign of fear,
The one
hidden
that
from
had
the
left
world.
a watermark and been
This person
removed.
lived in terror of a
There
secret
had
being
been two
revealed.
people in the study
It is written
that
here,
evening.
plain
The
as
evidence
day.
of the watermark was quiet
Every
but
detail
absolute.
of the murder
Two
replays
glasses,
in my mind.
one remaining.
Tonight,
Someone
reverse
had sat
number,
across
the
from
chestnut to a
Ashworth,
Viking.
had taken a drink, had, when it was over, removed the glass, had
This
presumably
letter from
brought
Gerald
what was in
Ashbury changes
Ashworth's
everything.
glass. The study
He hid it
window
inside the
closed
east
when the
wall
body was
alcove.
found. On day -3,
No one else must know.
someone, still unidentified, had opened it. But on the night of day 0, it was closed. The cold February air was kept out. The room was warm. The fire had been attended to recently, the coal arranged in the way of someone who expected to be there for some time. Ashworth had expected company. He had then invited it, or accepted it willingly. He had sat in his chair and poured from the decanter, or allowed to be poured, and he had talked, presumably, about whatever one talks about in the last conversation of one's life, not knowing it is the last. And then the room had contained
You were
only
manipulating
one
me
person,
this whole
and
time.
that person had done what needed to be
Indeed.
done, had removed
The game
glass,
is over.
had stood for a moment in the room that was now quiet in a way
You thought you
rooms
could
are
hide
quiet.
this?
When the
I know
particular
everything.
human
What is that?
mechanism
Where
that
did you get
animated
it?
them has
The
stopped
details don't
and
matter.
had
You will
left.
do as I
The fire
say,
burned on for
or this
another
goes
hour
public.
without him. The clock ticked. The room settled into its new and permanent condition. We will not see what happened between 11 o'clock and 11:17. Some things are more present in the
I
withholding.
must appear innocent.
The third floor bathroom,
Unaware of any guilt.
11:21 p.m. The bathroom
My hands
adjoined
stay
the
now.
study.
Poirot's
At
gaze misses
11:21,
nothing.
4 minutes perhaps
Innocent.
after what had
I am
happened in
innocent.
the room next door,
The
tap
poison
was
was in the
turned
cup.
on.
Who
This is
poured it?
known because Reginald
I don't know.
Fortescue, lying awake
And
in
you,
his
monsieur?
room 1 floor below,
Your hand was on
heard
the
it.
pot.
He registered
not
it with
I.
the partial attention of a man whose mind is elsewhere, the sound entering consciousness, being categorized as ordinary, household, irrelevant, and released. He did not look at his clock. He did not think about it again until day 3, when Poirot, asking him with careful casualness whether he had noticed anything unusual on the night in question, prompted him to reach back through the events of that evening and find, in the texture of his sleepless hours, the sound of water running. 21 minutes past 11.
The
He was
victim was
approximate
seated
about
here,
the time, 20
unmoving.
past, perhaps half past. He
He
was not
reached for the
certain.
glass.
He had
A
not
moment
been
of
watching the
hesitation.
clock, but he had heard
Locked,
it for perhaps
as I
2
suspected.
minutes. Then stopped.
The truth.
Then footsteps in
Poirot
the
has
corridor
known
above,
since the
measured,
second day.
unhurried. The footsteps of someone who has finished what they were doing and is moving on to what comes next, in the
Grief
orderly
is a
sequence
curious
of a
thing.
person whose
It
actions are
exposes
following
what we
a plan.
hide.
Then,
What are you implying, Monsieur
silence.
Poirot?
The one who
house
feigns
settled.
mourning the loudest
clock on the
often has
first
the
floor
most to
landing
conceal.
ticked its 60-year tick. The frost outside thickened on the pavement. Somewhere in the house, in a room that was now entirely quiet and entirely still, one person lay in the dark with their eyes open and their breathing even and their hands, clean now, folded at their sides, and the long, careful work of the next 7 days began. The body would be found in 11 hours. In 12 hours, the police would be in the house, moving through rooms with the confident disruption of people who mistake activity for progress. In 36 hours, Hercule Poirot would arrive, stand in the doorway of the sitting room for 3 seconds, and begin. In 96 hours, the police would arrest the wrong person.
Human
And in
nature, my friends, is a
168
curious thing.
hours,
It
7
conceals
days
dark
from the moment the
truths.
tap was turned
And the
on
mind,
and the
when
hands were
burdened by
washed,
guilt, finds it
and the house
difficult to
settled
remain
into
fast
its new
in the
and
smallest
terrible
of gestures.
silence. Poirot would stand in, the study with the fire burning low and name, with sad and certain eyes, the person who had done this, the person who had planned it. The person who had, on a night when everyone else in the house was either sleeping or lying in the dark thinking about other things, moved through the quiet corridor with the pace of someone who has a
It is a pleasure to make your
destination and a
acquaintance.
timeline and
The
arrived.
pleasure is mine,
It
Mr.
happened
Poirot.
quickly, as these things do
I
when the
understand you have an
machinery of
intriguing
official
tale to share,
conclusion has been
one
set
that
in
demands the
motion
utmost
and
discretion.
requires only the final formal
The arm
act
of the chair
arriving at a
conceals
name.
much, but not from these eyes.
Inspector Crail had spent 4
Ah,
days
the
building toward
invisible
this moment
becomes
with the
visible.
focused energy
The
of a
story
man
in
who
the skin of the
understands
wood.
that an open case
Human
is a
nature, my
professional
friends, is a
inconvenience,
labyrinth of
and a
contradictions.
closed one is a professional
Beneath surface of
achievement,
scintillatory,
and who has not
darker
yet
impulses
arrived at the
often lurk.
understanding, which some men
Do you not
never
agree?
do, that these two
Pleasure to make
categories
your
are not
acquaintance.
always as simply
The
related
pleasure
as
is
they
all mine,
appear.
Monsieur Poirot.
He had his evidence.
I trust your journey was
He
agreeable.
had his timeline.
Quite.
He
The
had most
surroundings are most
importantly a
intriguing.
narrative that was coherent
I sit
and
alone
complete
in the dark,
and answered the
replaying the
questions
plan.
he had thought to ask,
The moonlight
which is
reveals
not
my
the same
trembling
thing
hands.
as answering all the
The fire's
questions,
glow mirrors
but
the
is
shallow
frequently
line. I cannot escape
mistaken for it. He came at 4 o'clock with Sergeant Briggs and 2 constables, which was perhaps 1 constable more than strictly necessary, but conveyed the appropriate weight of institutional
Now,
certainty.
let us see what secrets you
Poirot
hold.
was in the hallway when they arrived. He had been
Ah,
apparently
yes,
on his
the
way
invisible
somewhere,
become
coat
visible.
on, hat in hand, and had stopped when the doorbell sounded
Now,
and Mrs.
let us see
Alderton
what
admitted the
secrets you
inspector.
hold.
He stood now slightly to the left
Ah,
of the
yes,
staircase,
the
in the
invisible
position of
become
someone who has
visible.
paused in transit and has no particular stake in the proceedings, which was entirely false but entirely convincing. "Inspector," he said pleasantly, "you have news." "An arrest," said Crail, with the particular
Regardez les mains du
compression of a
sujet dans
man
ce
who has
portrait.
been waiting to
Observez
say
comme
a
elles sont
specific
crispées.
word and is now saying
Elles
it.
trahissent une peur profonde,
He
une
looked,
terreur
Poirot
cachée dans
noted,
l'âme.
satisfied.
La vérité se
The
lit dans ces
satisfaction
détails.
of a man holding the completed version of a puzzle he has been working on, not yet knowing that several pieces have been forced into positions they do not quite fit. "Ah," said Poirot. Reginald
Ashbury, you are under
was in
arrest.
the upstairs sitting room.
This is
The
absurd.
one with the
On what
angled
grounds?
chairs and the view
Conspiracy
of
and
the bear
fraud.
garden
Hands
when
behind
they
your
came
back.
for him.
You can't do
He
this
had
to
been
me.
there for an hour, doing nothing in particular, reading or attempting it. The same page for 40 minutes, the words present on the page and absent from his comprehension, his mind conducting its own separate and circular business in the manner of minds that are grieving and cannot stop. The book was face down on the arm of the chair. The garden outside the window
Human
was the
nature,
pewter
mes
grey
amis, is
of
a
a
most
February
curious thing.
afternoon, making its
It compels
early
one to act
preparations
against
for
one's
dark.
own interests.
When the door opened
the
and
eyes,
Inspector
they
Crail
reveal
came
what the
in,
lips will
followed
not.
by Briggs, followed
I
by
sit
the
alone,
2 constables who
replaying it in my
positioned
mind.
themselves with the careful
The silence of the
unobtrusiveness of
library
men
echoes
trained
my
to block
thoughts.
exits while
My hands
appearing
betray
merely
the
to
fear I
occupy
hide.
space. Reginald Fortescue looked up with the slightly dazed expression of someone returning from a significant distance. Then he understood what he was seeing, and the distance collapsed, and he was entirely
Reginald
present.
Ashbury, you are
And
under
what
arrest.
replaced the daze
No,
was
this is a
something that
mistake.
moved through several
And
stages in rapid
Now,
succession.
deuce.
Confusion, then a strange, almost relief. The relief of a man who has been dreading something vague and has now been given a specific thing to dread instead. Then, as Crail began to speak, a genuine and growing disbelief that had the quality of a physical sensation, as though the floor were demonstrating properties it had not previously disclosed. "I'm sorry," Fortescue said when Crail had finished.
Observe the hands.
He
so
said it not
tightly
as an
clasped,
apology, but
a
as a
classic
request
sign of
for
fear,
repetition,
hidden from the
as
world.
though the words Crail
This
had
person
used
lifted
were in
terror
a
of secret
language
being
he
revealed.
almost spoke,
It
but
is
not
written
quite.
here, plain as day.
"I'm sorry you believe that I."
Every
"The
detail
evidence
of the
is quite
murder
clear,
replays
Mr.
in my
Fortescue,"
mind.
said Crail.
Tonight, reverse
"What
another
evidence?"
assessment to my
The voice had
backing.
changed now, found a harder register, the register of a man who has
This letter
decided
from
that
Gerald
if this
Ashbury
is happening,
changes
he will
everything.
face it with something
He
resembling
hid it
his
inside the
spine
east
intact.
wall alcove.
"I want
No
to
one
know
else must know.
specifically what you believe constitutes. That will be for the appropriate time and place," said Crail. Fortescue stood. He was taller than Crail, which counted for nothing, and which he seemed briefly to think might count for something. He looked at the constables by the door. He looked at Sergeant Briggs, who was looking at his notebook with the focused attention of a man who has decided that the notebook is where his gaze belongs. He looked at the garden through the window, the bare tree, the frost-hardened ground, with the look of someone taking inventory of ordinary things because the ordinary things
You were
are
manipulating
suddenly
me
precious.
this whole time.
Then the terror arrived.
Indeed.
Quietly,
The game is
without
over.
announcement, the way real terror always arrives. Not the
You thought you
dramatic
could
cold
hide
rush
this?
of it, but the slow,
I know
certain,
everything.
spreading
What is that?
recognition
Where
of
did you
what
get
this
it?
actually means.
The details don't
and
matter.
how
You will
large it
do
is,
as
and
I say.
how
or this
utterly
goes public.
unprepared he is for its dimensions. He was 26 years old. He went with them. He was not, to his credit, anything other than what he was. Frightened and bewildered and 26 years old and innocent,
I
though
must
that
appear
last
innocent,
quality was not visible
unaware
to
of any
Inspector
guilt.
Crail. and would not
My hands stay now.
be made
Poirot's gaze
visible
misses
until it was
nothing.
too late to matter to the people it should have
Innocent. I am
mattered to most.
innocent.
The real
The poison
killer.
was in the cup.
4:06
Who
p.m.
poured it?
4 minutes into the
I
arrest.
don't know.
While Crail
you,
was still
monsieur?
in the upstairs
Your
sitting
hand was
room
on the
and
pot.
the sounds of the official
was not
proceedings
I.
were audible in the formal, muffled way of sounds. Traveling through a house's floors and walls, the person we have been watching, in the chair nearest the cold radiator of the main sitting room, became very still. Not the stillness of shock, not the stillness of grief. The stillness of a mechanism pausing, of a system that has been operating under sustained, extraordinary pressure, suddenly receiving information that causes it to pause, to recalibrate, to begin the tentative, careful process of releasing that pressure by
The
fractions.
victim was seated
relief.
here.
It
unmoving.
arrived first in the shoulders.
He reached
the
for the
specific,
glass,
almost
a moment of
imperceptible
hesitation.
lowering of a tension so
Locked,
long maintained
as I
that it had
suspected.
ceased to register as tension and
The
had
truth.
simply become the new
Poirot has
architecture
known
of
since the second
the
day.
body. Then in the hands, which had been arranged with deliberate casualness in the lap, and which now,
Grief
for
is a
approximately
curious
4
thing.
seconds,
It
was still
exposes
in a
what we
different
hide.
way.
What
The
are you implying,
stillness of
Monsieur
something
Poirot?
genuinely
The one who feigns mourning
rest
the
rather
loudest
than
often has the
performing
most to
rest.
conceal.
Then the face. The face was the most careful, because the face was what could be seen. And the person in the chair by the cold radiator understood, with the precision of someone who has spent 4 days understanding exactly what could be seen and from where and by whom, that there was no one in the room at this moment who was looking at them. No one, that is, except Hercule Poirot, who was standing in the doorway of the sitting room, having come from the hallway, having observed the ascent of Crail and his constables, having followed at his own pace, having arrived at the doorway of the sitting room at approximately the moment when the relief began in the shoulders and moved through the hands and reached the face.
Human
And
nature,
who
my
was looking
friends,
at
is
the
a curious
person in the
thing.
chair
It
by the
conceals dark truths.
Cold radiator
And the
with
mind,
the
when
expression of a
burdened by
man
guilt, finds it
confirming
difficult
something
to
he
remain
already
fast
knew.
in the
The
smallest of
expression
gestures.
lasted perhaps 2 seconds. By the time the person in the chair registered his presence and looked up, it was gone. In its place, the pleasant, mild, somewhat vague expression that Poirot had worn with remarkable consistency for 4 days. The expression of a man who is listening and observing and has not yet drawn his conclusions. The expression of a man
It
who
is a
finds
pleasure to make
Inspector
your
Crail's
acquaintance.
conclusion entirely
The pleasure is
reasonable
mine, Mr.
and is
Poirot.
perhaps inclined to
I understand
accept
you
it.
have an intriguing
He had
tale
worn
to
this
share,
expression with great
one that
care.
demands the utmost
It had
discretion.
been enormously useful.
The arm of the
Hercule
chair
Poirot,
conceals much, but
4:09
not
p.m.
from these eyes.
3 minutes later, Inspector
The
Crail came
invisible
downstairs
becomes
with Reginald
visible.
Fortescue
A
between
story
the
in
two
the skin of the
constables and the
wood.
particular energy
Human
of a man
nature,
in
my
the final
friends, is
act
a
of
labyrinth of
achievement.
contradictions.
Poirot was in the
Beneath
hallway.
surface of subtlety,
He had
darker
moved from the
impulses
doorway
often
of the
lurk.
sitting room to the hallway
Do you
in
not
the
agree?
intervening 3 minutes,
Pleasure to make your
which anyone who
acquaintance.
noticed would
The pleasure
attribute
is all
to the
mine,
natural
Monsieur Poirot.
movement of a man
I trust
finding
your
a
journey
better
was agreeable?
vantage, a point,
Quite.
and which was
The
in fact
surroundings are
something
most
slightly
intriguing.
different. Crail
I sit
stopped when
alone
he
in
saw
the
him.
dark, replaying the
The
plan.
inspector had the look
The moonlight
Poirot had
reveals my
observed over
trembling
4
hands.
days of a
The
man who
fire's
found
glow
Poirot's
mirrors the
presence in
shadow
his
in mine.
case
I cannot
simultaneously
escape it.
useful for the reflected prestige of having the famous Belgian taken interest, and faintly aggravating in the way that all experts find the proximity of other experts aggravating when
Now,
conclusions
let
are
us see
being
what
reached.
secrets you hold.
Monsieur Poirot, said Crail with the expansive
Ah,
manner of a
yes,
man
the
who has won and
invisible
is
become
prepared to be
visible.
generous about it. I think we've got our man. Poirot
Now,
looked at
let us see
Fortescue.
what secrets you hold.
Fortescue looked back at him with an expression
Ah,
that was,
yes,
in that
the
moment,
invisible
simply
become
human.
visible.
The look of a person who needs to be seen accurately by at least one person in the room and understands somewhere that this small, impeccable man in the hallway may be the only candidate. Poirot held his gaze for one moment. Then he
Regardez les
looked
mains
at
du
Crail.
sujet dans ce portrait.
The evidence
Observez comme elles
against
sont
the young
crispées.
man, he said, is very
Elles trahissent
suggestive.
une peur
He
profonde, une
paused, the
terreur
motive,
cachée dans
the
l'âme.
argument, the
La
question of the
vérité se
will.
lit dans ses détails.
Another pause, fractional, precisely weighted. Yes. I can see why you have arrived where you have, Inspector. It is a most coherent conclusion. Crail, who was not a subtle man, but was not entirely
Reginald
without
Ashbury, you are
instinct,
under
looked at him
arrest.
for a moment.
This is
You
absurd.
have
On
reservations?
what grounds?
Poirot made a small
Conspiracy and
gesture,
fraud.
the
Hands
gesture
behind
of
your
a
back.
man setting
You
something
can't
aside.
do this to
I
me.
have perhaps 1 or 2 small questions that remain. But then, he smiled. I always have questions. It is my great failing. You must not let an old man's habit of questioning delay the proper process of the law. Crail nodded, with the satisfaction of a man who has received a qualified endorsement and chosen to hear it as an unqualified one, will be in touch, he
Human
said.
nature, mes amis,
And
is
he
a most
went,
curious
with his
thing.
constables and
It
his
compels one
arrested
to act
man,
against one's
out the
own
front door and
interests.
into the February afternoon,
And the eyes, they
where a
reveal
police
what the
car
lips will
waited
not.
with the patient, institutional
I
readiness
sit
of
alone,
machinery that is
replaying it in my
used
mind.
but awaiting.
The
door
silence
closed.
of the library
house was
echoes my
quiet.
thoughts.
Poirot stood in the hallway
My
for a
hands
moment
betray the
alone,
fear I
listening to the
hide.
car engine start and recede. Then he turned. The person from the sitting room was now in the hallway doorway, drawn there, presumably, by the sounds of the departure, by the natural human impulse
Reginald
to witness the
Ashbury, you
official
are under
conclusion
arrest.
of something.
No, this is a mistake.
Standing with one
And
hand on the
anti-bite
doorframe,
it now.
an expression
Deuce.
of appropriate solemnity. A face that was performing the correct version of itself with the competence that 4 days of sustained performance produces. A kind of expertise, Poirot thought, that is genuinely impressive and genuinely terrible. They looked at each other. "Well," said the person, in a voice from which the relief had been entirely evacuated, leaving behind only the correct residue of a
Observe the
complicated
hands,
grief.
so tightly clasped.
"I suppose
the
that is
classic sign of
resolved, then."
fear,
"Oui,"
hidden from
said
the
Poirot
world.
pleasantly. "For
This
the
person
moment,
lived in
a
terror, a
brief,
secret being
both
revealed.
of them inside.
It is written here, plain
You
as
must
day.
be relieved," said the person.
Every
"to have
detail of the
matter
murder
clarified.
replays in my
I am
mind.
many things," said Poirot,
Tonight, reverse
with a
number,
vague,
assessment
slightly
of my
distracted
rank.
air of a man whose mind is already elsewhere. Relieved
This
is
letter from
perhaps
Gerald
not the
Ashbury
precise
changes
word.
everything.
He reached for his
He
hat,
hid it
which he
inside
had
the
been
east
holding
wall
throughout.
alcove.
He had never
No one else must
apparently
know.
abandoned his intention of going somewhere. I find in these matters that clarification and resolution are not always the same thing. But the inspector is a confident man, and confidence has its own momentum. He put on his hat. He adjusted it with 2 fingers. "I shall take a small walk," he said. "The cold air is beneficial to the thoughts." He went to the door, opened it, paused with his back to the room, his hand on the door. "One small thing," he said in the tone of a man remembering an afterthought. "The button, the small black button with the anchor. You will know the one I mean." A silence. It
You were
lasted
manipulating
exactly
me
as
this
long as
whole
Poirot
time.
wanted it to last. "I'm afraid I don't," said
Indeed.
the person behind
The
him.
game is over.
"No," said Poirot. "No, of course not." He stepped out
You
into
thought
the
you could
cold.
hide this?
The door closed behind him.
I know everything. What is
Inside
that? Where
the
did you
sitting
get
room,
it?
in the chair
details
that had
don't
been
matter.
for
You will
4
do
days
as
the
I
chair
say,
nearest the
or
cold
this goes
radiator,
public.
something shifted. The careful competence of the performance flickered briefly like a lamp in a draught. He had known about the button. He had said so, or had he? He had said, "You will know the one I mean,"
I must appear innocent.
which was not the same as
unaware of
saying
any
"I know
guilt.
what it means," which
My
was not the
hands
same
now,
as saying
Poirot's
"I know where
gaze
it
misses
came
nothing.
from." Was it?
Innocent.
The person in the
I am
chair
innocent.
thought about this with a precision
The
that
poison
had,
was in the
over
cup.
4 days,
Who
become
poured
very
it?
well practiced.
I don't know.
Thought about it
And
the
you,
way
monsieur?
a structural engineer
Your hand was on the
examines a
pot.
wall, looking for
It
the
was not I.
load-bearing point, the place where, if pressure is applied, everything follows. He had a button. He had said the words, "You will know the one I mean." He had then gone for a walk. He had arrested no one. He had made no accusation. He had let Inspector Crail take Reginald Fortescue away in a police car, and had said only that Crail's conclusion was coherent, which was, on reflection, not quite the same as calling it correct. The fire in the sitting room grate ticked. The February dark pressed at the windows. 3 days remained. In 3 days,
The victim was
everyone
seated
would gather
here,
in the study.
unmoving.
And Poirot,
He reached
small
for the
and still
glass.
and wearing
A
his
moment of
sad, certain
hesitation.
eyes, would stand at the center of
Locked,
the room and speak.
as I suspected.
And in the chair nearest the cold
The truth.
radiator, something that had been
Poirot
almost
has known
released
since
was
the
now
second
quietly being gathered back in. The work was not over. The careful, exhausting, necessary work was not
Grief
over.
is a curious
but first,
thing.
before the
It
arrest,
exposes
before
what
the
we
arrival,
hide.
before
What
the
are you
body in
implying,
the
Monsieur
chair and the
Poirot?
housemaid's
The
single
one who
scream,
feigns mourning the
there was a
loudest
wound.
often has the most to conceal.
There is always a wound. We must go back further than any section has yet taken us. Back to before this house, before this crime, before the decision made in a quiet room on day -3. Back to the original injury. The one that made everything else not just possible, but, to the person who carried it, inevitable. We must establish before anything else that Clara Tate had not always been a person who kept things. This requires explanation, not of the psychological variety, which tends toward the reductive, but of the simple biographical kind. The kind that says, here is a person, and here is what happened to them, and here is how those two things met, and what resulted from the meeting. Clara Tate was born
Human
in
nature, my
1891
friends, is
in
a
a town in
curious thing.
Shropshire that
It
had one
conceals dark
solicitor,
truths.
one doctor, one
And the
church,
mind, when burdened
and the
by guilt,
particular
finds it
social
difficult to
architecture
remain
of small
fast
places.
in the smallest of
The
gestures.
intricate, load-bearing structure of what everyone knows about everyone, and what everyone has agreed not to say. Her father was a school teacher of moderate distinction and immoderate principle. Her mother was a woman who understood that principle, in the quantities her husband possessed it, was a luxury that required a practical counterbalance, and who provided
It is
that
a pleasure to make
counterbalance
your
with the
acquaintance.
quiet,
pleasure is mine, Mr.
unacknowledged
Poirot.
competence of women who
I
keep
understand
things
you have an
functional
intriguing tale to
while the
share,
people around them
one
keep
that demands
things
the
meaningful.
utmost discretion.
Clara had been, by
The arm
all
of the chair
available
conceals
evidence,
much,
a
but
particular
not from
kind of
these
child,
eyes.
not brilliant in the showy sense,
The
not
invisible
the child who
becomes
astonishes,
visible.
but the
A
child who
story in the skin
understands,
of the
which is a
wood.
different and in some
Human nature, my
ways
friends,
more
is a
durable
labyrinth of
gift. She understood
contradictions.
how things worked.
Beneath surface of
Systems,
subtlety,
structures, the
darker
relationship
impulses
between
often
cause and
lurk.
effect, and between
Do you not
effect and the
agree?
causes that effect
Pleasure to
became.
make your acquaintance.
She had, from an
pleasure is
early
all mine,
age, the
Monsieur
instinct
Poirot.
for what held things
I trust
together,
your journey was
and
agreeable?
what would, if removed, cause
Right.
them to fall
The
apart.
surroundings are most
She
intriguing.
applied this instinct,
I
growing
sit
up,
alone
to
in the
everything
dark,
she
replaying the
encountered,
plan.
to her father's school,
moonlight
to
reveals
her
my
mother's
trembling
household, to the social
The fire's
machinery
glow
of the small
mirrors the show,
town,
and
to the
I
books she
cannot
read in the
escape it.
considerable quantities available to a school teacher's daughter. She was not unhappy. She was, perhaps, in the way of people whose understanding exceeds their circumstances, slightly in excess of
Now,
where she was.
let us see what
At
secrets you
22,
hold.
she came to London. The firm was called
yes,
Ashworth
the
and Clement,
invisible
and
become
it occupied
visible.
3 floors of a building in Gray's Inn, and Clara Tate
Now,
arrived
let
there
us
in
see
the autumn
what
of
secrets you
1913 as a
hold.
secretary, which was, in
Yes,
1913,
the
one of
invisible
the
become
few
visible.
professional capacities available to a young woman of intelligence and without capital, and which Clara entered with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who understands that the available door, still a door, Edmund Ashworth
Regardez
was
les mains du
41
sujet
years
dans
old.
ce portrait.
He
Observez comme
was
elles
at
sont
that point
crispées.
in his career,
Elles
at the
trahissent
height
une
of
peur
his particular
profonde, une
powers,
terreur cachée dans l'âme.
which is to say, he
La
was at
vérité
the
se
height
lit
of
dans
his
ces
command
détails.
of other people's affairs, and of the influence that command produced. He was not kind exactly, but he was capable of a species of attention that, in those who received it, produced the sensation of kindness.
Reginald Ashbury, you are
He
under
noticed
arrest.
things about the people
This is
who worked
absurd.
for him.
On what
He
grounds?
remembered them.
Conspiracy
He used
and
what he
fraud.
noticed
Hands
and
behind your back.
remembered.
You can't
Sometimes
do this
generously,
to me.
Sometimes not, but always precisely. He noticed Clara Tate within a week of her arrival. What he noticed was this, that she organized things in the way that revealed she understood their relationships, not merely their surfaces. That she answered questions with the information the question required rather than the information the question asked for, which is a
Human nature,
considerably
mes
rarer
amis, is a
skill.
most curious thing.
That she
It
had,
compels
in
one
the
to act
careful
against one's own
performance of a role
interests.
designed not to call attention
And the
to
eyes,
itself,
they reveal
a
what the
quality
lips
of
will not.
self-possession that called attention to
I
itself
sit alone,
anyway, in a
replaying
way
it in
that
my
genuine
mind.
things do.
The silence of
He
the
gave her
library
more
echoes my
responsibility.
thoughts.
She discharged it. He gave
My
her
hands
more.
betray
He
the fear
discharged
I
that too.
hide.
Over the course of that first year, she became not indispensable, which is a word that flatters the indispensable person and obscures the relationship's actual nature, but integral. The way
Reginald
correctly
Ashbury,
placed
you are under
structural
arrest.
member becomes
No,
integral.
this is a
You could
mistake.
remove it.
And antibiotic
But you
that
would need
now
to
do
replace
it.
it, and the replacement would require considerable effort, and the building would, during the interval, be less sound. This was not, Clara understood, the same as being valued, but it was adjacent to it, and the adjacency was sufficient. She was 23 and London was large, and the work was work she was genuinely good at, and for several years this was enough. The thing that was not enough began in 1917.
Observe the hands, so tightly clasped.
The war had
a classic
changed the
sign
firm
of fear,
as it had
hidden
changed
from the
everything.
world.
Clement
This
dead
person
at the
lived in
Somme,
terror of a secret
2
being
junior
revealed.
partners gone.
It is written
the
here,
work
plain as
contracted
day.
and then expanded in different
Every
directions
detail
as
of
the
the
legal
murder
needs
replays
of
in my mind.
wartime created their own
Tonight,
peculiar
reverse
demands.
my blood, the chassement
Ashworth
of
was
my
by
mind.
then the sole principal. He worked with ferocious, sustained intensity.
This letter from Gerald
the
Ashbury
intensity of
changes
a man
everything.
for whom work is not
He
a
hid it
means
inside
but a
the
condition
east
of
wall
existence.
alcove.
The thing that keeps
No one
the
else
self
must know.
coherent. Clara worked alongside him through the years of the war with the same intensity. They were in the offices sometimes until 9, 10, 11 at night. The city blacked out around them, the particular quiet of wartime London outside the windows, the lamplight on the documents, and the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional exchange of necessary words. It was in this proximity during this time that the thing began. She did not decide it. This is important. It was not a decision in the way that decisions are decisions, considered, deliberate, chosen from alternatives.
You were
It
manipulating
was the
me
thing
this
that
whole
happened in the
time.
absence of alternatives. In the
Indeed.
concentrated
The game is
space of
over.
shared work and shared hours, and the particular atmosphere
thought
of
you could hide
wartime,
this?
which has its own
I know
relationship
everything. What is that?
urgency
Where did you
and
get
meaning
it?
and the
The
compression
details
of
don't
time.
matter.
She
You
was
will
26.
do as I say,
He was
or
45.
this goes public.
He was married, had been married, to a woman named Vivienne, who was in the country for the duration of the war, in the house of her parents in Buckinghamshire, which had been considered safer than
I must
London.
appear innocent.
He was not,
unaware of
to
any
Clara's
guilt.
understanding, happily
My
married.
hands stay now.
But
Poirot's
then the
gaze misses
understanding of a
nothing.
26-year-old woman regarding the
Innocent.
happiness
I
of
am
a
innocent.
marriage she has only observed from
poison
the
was in the
outside
cup.
is, by
Who poured it?
definition,
I don't know.
incomplete. She knew it was
And
wrong.
you, monsieur?
She had never
Your
been
hand was
unclear
on
on
the
this
pot.
point, even at the time,
was not
even
I.
in the most concentrated center of it. She was a woman of organized and honest mind, and she organized this honestly. It was wrong. She did it anyway for 14 months, and then it ended. Not dramatically, not with recrimination, but with the particular deflation of things that were never given the right conditions to be anything other than temporary. Ashworth ended it. He was direct about it, in the way he was direct about everything, without cruelty, but without the softening that might have left her some small dignity to
The
retrieve.
victim was seated here,
He said that it had
unmoving.
been, and he paused here, choosing,
He reached
which
for the
was
glass,
unlike him,
a
an
moment of
error of
hesitation.
judgment on both their parts.
Locked,
She
as I
accepted
suspected.
this because she had no alternative,
truth.
and because, in some
Poirot
structural
has
part
known
of
since the
herself, she
second
agreed
day.
with it. He said it need not affect their professional relationship, which was also, she knew,
Grief is
a
a
statement
curious
about
thing.
what their
It
professional
exposes what
relationship
we
was
hide.
worth to him,
What are you
and what
implying,
she
Monsieur
was
Poirot?
worth within it.
The one
and
who
what the
feigns mourning
preceding
the
14
loudest
months
often has
had,
the most to
in his
conceal.
accounting, actually constituted. She said she understood, she did understand. That was the particular nature of her suffering. She understood it too well to be able to simply be injured by it, and too well to be able to simply set it aside. Understanding in this variety is its own wound, she stayed. This requires its own explanation and has one, the simplest and most human kind. She stayed because leaving would have required her to explain the leaving, and the explaining would have required the truth, and the truth would have destroyed her professionally in the way that such truths in 1918 destroyed women professionally and left men largely intact. She stayed because the work was
Human
the work
nature,
she was
my
good
friends,
at,
is a
and the
curious
work
thing.
was,
It
at that
conceals
point,
dark
the thing she
truths.
had.
And the
She
mind,
stayed
when
because
burdened by
Ashworth
guilt,
had been
finds it
right
difficult
in
to
his bloodless,
manifest in the
structural
smallest
way.
of gestures.
It need not affect their professional relationship, and it did not, or she did not allow it to. She built, over the years that followed, a self-containment of extraordinary quality, Doctor. Marsh would call it that, 22 years later, over tea in an upstairs sitting room, self-containment, and would mean it as admiration, and would be in the way of admiring the symptom
It is a
rather
pleasure to make your
than
acquaintance.
understanding the wound
The pleasure
entirely
is mine,
right
Mr.
and
Poirot.
entirely wrong.
I understand you have an
When
intriguing
Ashworth
tale
left
to
the
share.
firm, in
One that demands the
1924,
utmost
under
discretion.
circumstances that different people
The arm of the chair
characterized
conceals
differently,
much, but
and
not
which
from these
involved a
eyes.
financial matter that the partnership had
The
resolved
invisible
but not,
becomes visible.
depending
A
on who
story
was
in the
asked,
skin of the
resolved
wood.
satisfactorily.
Human nature,
Clara
my
went with him.
friends, is a
She
labyrinth
told
of
herself this was
contradictions.
professional loyalty
Beneath
and
surface
pragmatic
of
assessment of her
scintillatory,
own
darker
prospects.
impulses
Both of
often
these were
lurk.
true.
Do you not
Neither was
agree?
complete. She worked
Pleasure
for
to
him
make
for
your
6
acquaintance.
years in the Baker
The
Street
pleasure
house.
is all mine, Monsieur Poirot.
She was scrupulous
trust
and
your journey was
excellent and
agreeable.
self-contained.
Quite.
And what had
The
happened
surroundings
between
are
them in
most intriguing.
1917 and 1918
I sit alone in
existed
the
in
dark,
a drawer that she
replaying
had
the plan.
closed and locked and
The
ceased
moonlight
to
reveals
examine.
my trembling hands.
She had not
The fire's
destroyed the
glow
letters.
mirrors the
She did
show,
not
and
know
I
why
cannot
she had
escape
not
it.
destroyed the letters. This was the one failure of her ordinarily rigorous tidiness. These particular documents from a particular drawer, which she could not make herself organize away. Edmund Ashworth
Now,
found
let
them,
us see what
not
secrets you
by
hold.
searching. Or not only by searching,
Ah, yes,
he was the
the
kind of
invisible
man who,
become
in the
visible.
examination of his own premises and his own records,
Now,
could claim to
let
be
us see
conducting
what
legitimate
secrets you hold.
administration while arriving at information
Ah, yes,
that a less
the
meticulous
invisible
man would
become
never
visible.
have encountered. He found them in the early autumn of 1939, when the house was being partially reorganized in preparation for the possibility of war, and Clara was assisting and had, for one afternoon, left her own
Regardez les mains du
small
sujet dans ce
office
portrait.
unattended.
Observez comme
He
elles sont
said nothing
crispées.
immediately. This
Elles
was,
trahissent
in
une peur
retrospect,
profonde,
more
une terreur
frightening than if
cachée
he
dans
had
l'âme.
said something.
La vérité se
He
lit dans ces
filed what he had
détails.
found in the place where he filed all information, the precise permanent archive of his memory, and he continued as before, or continued as before in all observable respects. What changed was below
Reginald
the
Ashbury,
observable,
you are under
in the
arrest.
particular quality of
This is
certain
absurd!
silences.
On what grounds?
In the way
Conspiracy
certain
and fraud, hands
conversations
behind your
had
back.
occasionally,
You can't
the
do
quality
this
of a
to
man
me!
who knows the complete version of what is being said and is choosing, for reasons of his own, to engage only with the partial version. In the way he sometimes looked at her across a room with an expression that was, if you knew what to look for, the expression of a man reviewing his holdings. She noticed. She was a person who noticed, and noticing she understood.
Human
and
nature,
understanding
Ms.
she
Amis, is
waited.
a most curious
She did
thing.
not know what she was
It
waiting
compels
for.
one to act against one's own
She knew
interests.
only that Ashworth had something
And the
had not
eyes, they
used
reveal
it,
what the
and that
lips
the
will
having
not.
without using was itself a use,
I sit alone,
a prolonged
replaying
and
it in my
particular
mind.
use that served
The
some
silence
purpose
of the
of his
library
own she could
echoes
not
my thoughts.
fully see.
My
She
hands
saw it
betray
on
the
the morning
fear
of
I
day
hide.
-5. She had come in at 8:15 as always. Ashworth was already in the study earlier than usual, which she registered. He called her in at 8:30, which was also earlier than usual. He had on his desk the
Reginald
leather
Ashbury,
document
you are
wallet.
under arrest. No,
He spoke
this
to
is
her
a mistake.
in the pleasant, direct
And
manner that she had worked
now,
alongside
deuce.
for 6 years, and that she had learned over those years contained no warmth, was precision in the costume of pleasantness, nothing more. He told her he had been reviewing his affairs. He told her he had been thinking about the future disposition of his estate. He told her, and here the pleasantness remained absolutely consistent, which was itself the most frightening thing, that there were certain
Observe
matters,
the hands, so
historical
tightly
matters,
clasped,
that
a
he
classic
felt it was
sign of fear,
important
hidden from the
to
world.
have documented.
This person
For
lived in terror of a
clarity,
secret
for the
being
proper
revealed.
management of all
It is written
relevant
here,
considerations.
plain as day.
He paused. You understand what
Every
I am
detail
referring
of the
to, he
murder
said.
replays in
Not
my
a question. Yes, she said.
Tonight, reversing up.
Good, I thought you would. He told her what he wanted. What he wanted was not money.
This letter
or
from
not
Gerald
only
Ashbury
money, which
changes
would have been
everything.
simpler, which
He
would
hid
have
it
had a
inside the
specific
east wall
quantity and a
alcove.
specific transaction
No one
and a
else must know.
definable end. What he wanted was more structural than that. He wanted her continued presence and her continued competence and her continued management of his affairs for as long as he required it, under terms that were now no longer professional but something else. Something that had no clean name, that existed in the space between employment and compulsion, that would last precisely as long as it served him and not a moment longer. He was, she understood, describing ownership. She sat in the chair across from his desk, the chair on the other side of the desk from the one where his body would
You
be
were
found
manipulating me
in
this
5
whole
days'
time.
And she looked at him,
Indeed.
the man she had
The
known
game
for
is over.
26 years. The man who had said in a lamplit
You
office
thought you
in
could hide this?
1918, an error
I know
of
everything.
judgment on
What
both
is
our
that?
parts,
Where did you get
and
it?
who hadn't
The
decided
details
that
don't
the
matter.
error was
You will
hers
do
alone
as I
and hers
say,
to pay for.
or this goes public.
She said she would need time to consider. He said pleasantly that of course she would. He said he was in no hurry. He said there was time. He was wrong about the time, but he did not know that yet. She left the
must
house
appear
at 6
innocent,
o'clock that evening,
unaware
the
of any
evening of
guilt.
day -5,
My
and
hands
walked for
thin
a
now.
long
Poirot's
time
gaze
through the
misses
cold
nothing.
streets, in the manner of a person for whom
Innocent. I
walking
am
is not
innocent.
exercise but
The poison was
thinking
in the
made
cup.
physical.
Who poured it?
She walked until the cold
don't
had
know.
moved from her hands
you,
to
monsieur?
her wrists to
Your
her
hand
arms,
was on the pot.
and she could no longer ignore
was not I.
And then she stopped in a doorway somewhere near Marylebone and stood with her back against the wood and looked at the street. She thought about what he had offered, which was not an offer. She thought about the 26 years, the 14 months, the letters she had not destroyed, and the morning in the early autumn of 1939 when she had left her office unattended, and the expression on his face that evening when she returned, which she had read correctly and had not allowed herself to fully read until now. She thought about
victim
the
was
word
seated
integral
here,
and the word
unmoving.
indispensable and the
He
difference
reached for the
between them,
glass. A
about what
moment
it
of
meant to be
hesitation.
valued, about the
Locked,
work she was good
as I
at,
suspected.
and what good work was worth,
The
and
truth.
to whom. She thought
Poirot
about
has
what he would
known
do if she
since the
said no,
second day.
about who would be told and how, and what the telling would cost her, about whether, at 48 years
Grief
old,
is a curious
with 26
thing.
years
It
of her
exposes what
working
we
life
hide.
contained in
What
this
are you
house and
implying,
this
Monsieur
man's
Poirot?
affairs,
The one
there
who
was
feigns
anywhere
mourning the
left to
loudest
go
often
that
has
would
the
not
most to
require
conceal.
walking through the destruction he would make of her name. She stood in the doorway for a long time. She was not, she told herself, a person who did things like this. She was not a person who had ever done things like this or contemplated things like this or believed herself capable of things like this. And yet the thought arrived, quietly, without drama, wearing the face of the only remaining door. He has done this to other people. She was certain of it, though she could not prove it. He has held other people in exactly this way, with exactly this mechanism, this pleasantness, this specific quality of power without fingerprints. He will do it again. He will do it for as long as he is able. He
Human
is the
nature,
kind
my
of
friends,
person
is a
who does
curious
this,
thing.
and there is
It
no
conceals
version of the
dark
future in
truths.
which he is not this
And the
person.
mind, when
And there
burdened
is
by
a
guilt,
letter.
finds it difficult to
She
remain
thought
fess
about the
in
letter,
the smallest of
the
gestures.
one in the correspondence pile, held up to the window, 3 pages long, the words visible through the paper in the particular way of truths that cannot be contained by their envelopes. The letter from a person she had been able to help identify through the careful management of Ashworth's affairs. as a previous incumbent of her own position. A person who had apparently
pleasure
also
to
been
make your
held in
acquaintance.
exactly this way.
The pleasure
Who
is
had
mine,
written
Mr.
3
Poirot.
pages that she had not
I
given to
understand you have an
Ashworth.
intriguing tale to share.
Who had written 3
one that
pages
demands
she
the
now
utmost
understood,
discretion.
for the precise reason
The
that
arm
she
of
had
the
not
chair
given them
conceals
to
much,
Ashworth,
but not from
because
these
she
eyes.
did not know, and was not sure she
the
would
invisible
know whether she
becomes
wanted him to
visible. A
have the
story in the
information
skin
they
of the wood.
contained. She understood
Human nature,
now.
my friends,
She
is a
understood what the
labyrinth of
letter was for.
contradictions.
And
Beneath
she
surface of
understood in the doorway in
darker
Marylebone,
impulses
with the
often
cold
lurk.
at her wrists and the street
Do you not
empty
agree?
before her,
A
that
pleasure
she was
to make your
standing at the
acquaintance.
precise moment that
The
comes
pleasure
to
is
some
all mine,
people
Monsieur
and
Poirot.
not others.
I trust your journey
The
was
moment
agreeable.
when the self that has always
Quiet.
been orderly
The
and
surroundings are
careful and
most intriguing.
self-contained is offered a
I
choice
sit
that
alone in the
orderly,
dark,
careful,
replaying the
self-contained
plan.
selves are
The
not
moonlight
supposed to
reveals my
face.
trembling hands.
She stood there for
The
a long
fire's glow
time.
mirrors the
If you had
show in
asked
mine,
her
I cannot
afterward
escape
to
it.
identify the precise moment when the decision was made, she could not have done it. There was no single moment. There was only the slow, cold, terrible arrival of a knowledge that had been approaching for 26
now, let
years.
us see what
That
secrets
Ashworth
you
had
hold.
always understood what she was worth,
Ah,
and had
yes,
always understood
the
it as
invisible becomes
a
visible.
quantity belonging to him, and that she had always on some level
Now,
known
let
this
us
and
see
had
what
continued
secrets you
anyway.
hold.
She was done continuing. She began to
Ah,
walk
yes,
back toward
the
Baker
invisible
Street.
becomes visible.
She was thinking, carefully and precisely, and with the full application of an organizing intelligence that had spent 6 years managing Edmund Ashworth's most complicated affairs, about what she was going to do.
Regardez
This
les
is
mains
the
du
section
sujet dans
you
ce
were warned
portrait.
about.
Observez
The
comme
one
elles sont
that asks
crispées.
quietly whether
Elles
you would have
trahissent une
done
peur
differently.
profonde,
She
une
was
terreur
48
cachée dans
years
l'âme.
old. She had
La
given
vérité se lit dans
26
ces
years.
détails.
She had been given, in return, 26 years of integration without value, competence without dignity, and the final logical extension of a relationship that had always been, at its structural
Reginald Ashbury,
core,
you are
about
under
power.
arrest.
She had not
This
been
is
planning
absurd.
a crime.
On
She
what
had been
grounds?
surviving one.
Conspiracy and fraud.
The
Hands
question
behind
the
your back.
story leaves
You can't
here,
do
in this
this to
doorway
me.
in Marylebone in the cold, is not whether what she did was right. It was not right. The question is whether it was, given everything that preceded it, entirely incomprehensible. That answer is what makes the room on day 7 so quiet. That answer is what put the grief in Poirot's eyes. The house was entirely quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness. The house
Human
was full,
nature,
in
mes
its
amis, is
various
a most
rooms,
curious thing.
of people in various
compels
states
one to
of
act against
wakefulness
one's
and
own
sleeplessness,
interests.
and the particular
In
suspended
the eyes,
condition
they
between
reveal
the
what
two
the
that
lips will
belongs
not.
to people whose lives
I
have
sit
been for
alone,
6 days in
replaying
the
it in my
vicinity
mind.
of violent death.
The silence of the
The
library
quiet was
echoes
the
my
quiet of a
thoughts.
place that has run out of
My
things to
hands
say in the
betray the
daylight
fear I
hours,
hide.
and has arrived at the nighttime hours with nothing resolved and everything still present, heavy and unspoken. Poirot lay in the dark. He had been lying in the dark for 2 hours. He had not
Reginald
attempted
Ashbury,
sleep,
you are under
had
arrest.
not after the
No,
first 20
this is a
minutes
mistake.
maintained the
And
posture of someone attempting
now.
sleep.
Deuce.
He lay on his back with his eyes open, and his hands folded on his chest in the manner of a man who has accepted that what is happening inside his mind is the night's primary occupation, and who has made his arrangements accordingly. The ceiling above him was invisible. The room was very dark. The blackout curtains, retained from the war years and not yet retired, admitting nothing from the street outside.
Observe the hands, so
He lay
tightly
in complete
clasped, the
darkness,
classic sign
and in
of
the
fear,
complete
hidden
darkness
from the
his mind
world.
moved.
This
It
person lived
began,
in
as it
terrible
often
secret being
began at this
revealed.
stage of a
It
case,
is written here,
with an
plain
image
as
rather
day.
than a thought, the writing table.
Every detail of the
The
murder
one
replays
beside
in
the
my
study
mind.
door, nudged by a
Tonight,
passing
reversed my
elbow
blood
or
pressure
hem
went
on the
to my
morning
back.
of day 1. Its arrangement altered from whatever arrangement it had held the night
This letter
before.
from Gerald Ashbury
He had
changes
looked at it on
everything.
day 2.
He
had
hid it
spent
inside
90
the east
seconds with
wall
it,
alcove.
looking at the angles,
No one
moving
else must
nothing,
know.
and had formed an impression he had not yet consciously articulated. The table had been near the door. Near enough that someone leaving the room in a normal manner, in the manner of someone who had been invited, who had sat across the desk, who was now rising and moving toward the exit, would not have passed close enough to nudge it. The angle was wrong for that. The nudge, to have altered the arrangement in the direction it had been altered, would have required someone moving not toward the door in the direct line from the desk, but around it. Skirting the side of the room, moving along
You were
the wall.
manipulating me this
Why
whole
would someone
time?
moving move along the wall? He had
Indeed.
filed this and left it.
The game is over.
Now, in the dark at midnight, it connected to something else.
You thought you could
The
hide
window.
this?
On day
I know
-3,
everything.
someone had
What
opened
is
the
that?
study
Where
window.
did you get it?
This
The
had been
details don't
established.
matter. You will do
The
as I
window
say,
had been opened,
or this
admitting
goes
cold
public.
air, and no one had admitted to opening it, and Mrs. Alderton had been certain it was closed on the evening of day -4. It had been opened between the evening of day -4 and the morning of day -3.
I must appear innocent,
The study was on the third
unaware
floor.
of any guilt.
The window looked onto the
My
side
hands
passage.
stay now. Poirot's gaze misses
If someone
nothing.
were in the side passage,
Innocent.
moving through
I am
it, as the
innocent.
figure observed at 11:09
poison
on the
was
night
in
of
the
the
cup.
crime had moved through
Who
it,
poured it?
and
I-
looked up,
I don't
and
know.
if the window were open
And you, monsieur?
or openable,
Your hand was on the pot.
from outside with knowledge
was
of the
not I.
mechanism, which was an old mechanism, the kind with a particular catch that someone familiar with the house would know, the table near the door, moved by someone who had entered not through the door but through the window, who had come up the side of the building. There was a drain pipe, old iron, the kind that holds the weight of a determined person, and come in through the third floor window, and moved through the room, and in the moving had caught the table with something, a coat hem, a bag, and altered it, and then left through the door.
The victim
Because
was
the
seated
window
here,
afterward was
unmoving.
closed, and found later,
reached for the
on
glass,
day 1 when
a
the body
moment
was
of
discovered,
hesitation.
closed.
Locked,
Someone had come in
as
through
I
the window and
suspected.
left through the door, which
The
meant
truth.
someone who knew the house.
Poirot has known since the
Who
second
knew the
day.
window mechanism? Who knew which door in the corridor led where, and how to reach the stairs without
Grief
encountering
is a
anyone,
curious thing.
and how to
It
leave the
exposes what
building
we hide.
without being
What
observed
are you implying,
departing
Monsieur
through the
Poirot?
front entrance.
The one who feigns mourning the
Someone
loudest
integral
often
to
has
the
the most
house's
to
daily
conceal.
operations, the compass needle moved. It had been moving for days, he recognized, and had been pointing in this direction for longer than he had allowed himself to see. The button. He had found it in the gap between the desk and the wall, a gap accessible from the window side of the room, not from the door side. A button from an evening coat, black with a small anchor motif. He had on day 2 examined the coats in the hallway. Not obtrusively. He was not obtrusive. He had the gift of examining things in the full presence of others without appearing to examine them. He had noted Fortescue's coats, 2 of them, both with their buttons intact. Cray's coat, buttons intact. Mrs. Ashworth's coat, not an evening coat, not relevant.
Human nature, my
Mrs.
friends, is a curious
Alderton's
thing.
coat,
It conceals
not
dark
relevant.
truths.
He had not on day 2
and the mind, when
examined the
burdened
coat
by
in the
guilt,
small
finds it
office
difficult
adjoining
to
the
remain
study.
fess in the
Clara Tate
smallest
had
of
an evening
gestures.
coat. He had noted this peripherally, had noted it in the way he noted everything without immediate conclusion. She wore it on the evenings she remained late. It was dark, navy, not black, but dark enough that a button from it, found in a gap beside a desk in an unlit room, would read as black to a cursory examination. He had not been cursory. He had simply not
It is
connected
a pleasure to make
until
your
day
acquaintance.
6. Until now,
The pleasure is
he
mine,
retrieved
Mr.
from the
Poirot.
pocket of his coat,
I
folded
understand you
over
have
the
an
chair
intriguing
beside
tale
the
to
bed,
share.
the button. He
One
had
that
carried
demands
it
the
for
utmost
5 days.
discretion.
He held it in the
The
dark
arm of the
between
chair
his fingers,
conceals much,
turning it.
but
He
not
could
from
not
these
see it.
eyes.
He could feel
Ah,
it,
the
small
invisible
anchor
becomes
motif under
visible.
his thumb,
A
the
story
quality
in the
of
skin of the
material,
wood.
the particular
Human
weight
nature,
of an
my
object
friends,
that
is a
belongs somewhere
labyrinth of
specific and has
contradictions.
been displaced.
Beneath surface of
He set it on the
scintillatory,
bedside
darker
table.
impulses
He heard it
often
rest
lurk.
against the wood with the small
Do you not
definitive
agree?
sound of a piece finding
Pleasure
its
to make
position.
your acquaintance.
Then the interview.
The pleasure
Day
is all
3,
mine, Monsieur
2
Poirot.
o'clock. The angled
I trust your
chairs,
journey
Doctor.
was agreeable.
Marsh with her medical bag and
The
her
surroundings
20
are most
minutes and her
intriguing.
careful, organized
I
intelligence.
sit alone in the dark,
Whatever Edmund
replaying
knew
the
about
plan.
her, he had
The
heard it.
moonlight reveals my
He
trembling
had
hands.
registered the self-correction
The
that
fire's glow
immediately
mirrors the
followed,
shadow in mine.
or
I
didn't
cannot
know,
escape it.
and he had filed it with the patient neutrality of a man who files things without yet knowing which drawer they belong in. Now he knew the drawer, Edmund Ashworth, who remembered everything, who kept memory
Now,
as a
let
form
us
of
see
debt
what
collection,
secrets you hold.
who had been 3 weeks before his death
Ah,
in the
yes,
state of a
the
man
invisible
acting on a
become
decision
visible.
already made, who had been on the morning of day
Now,
minus
let us
5
see what
conducting a
secrets you
conversation
hold.
with his secretary in which he described the
Ah,
future
yes,
terms of
the
their
invisible
professional
become
relationship.
visible.
Terms that were not professional at all, that were something else entirely. Clara, for instance. She has been with Edmund for 6 years and remained entirely intact. Whatever Edmund knew about her, what Edmund knew,
Regardez les mains du sujet dans ce
and then
portrait.
connecting
Observez
with
comme
the
elles sont
sudden
crispées.
completeness of things
Elles
that have
trahissent
been
une peur
approaching each
profonde,
other
une
through the
terreur
fog
cachée dans
and
l'âme.
have finally met.
La vérité se
The
lit dans
letter.
ses détails.
The letter that Clara had not given him. 3 pages, held up to the light. The shape of certain recurring words visible through the paper. He had known about the letter since day 2.
Reginald
he had heard
Ashbury,
her
you are
begin to
under
mention
arrest.
it and redirect
This is
the
absurd!
sentence
On
that
what
had started
grounds?
somewhere and
Conspiracy and
arrived somewhere
fraud. Hands
different.
behind your back.
He had
You
noted
can't
it and
do
moved
this
on.
to me!
He should not have moved on. The letter was not from a creditor, not from a legal correspondent. The quality of the stationery, cream, slightly more expensive than strictly necessary, a leftward slanting hand that had once been elegant and had cracked under the pressure of what was being said. He had seen this stationery before, Or rather, he had been told about
Human
this
nature, mes
stationery
amis, is a
before,
most
though not in
curious
those
thing.
terms.
It
Who
compels one
wrote
to
on
act
cream
against one's own
stationery in a
interests.
leftward slanting hand?
And the eyes, they
He
reveal
returned to
what the
day
lips
2
will
to the
not.
interviews. To the person he
I
had
sit alone,
discounted, written
replaying
in
it
his
in my
notebook
mind.
as peripheral observe
The
but do
silence
not
of the library
prioritize.
echoes my thoughts.
He had discounted
My
this
hands
person
betray the
because
fear
their
I
grief
hide.
appeared genuine, their distress appeared genuine, their bewilderment appeared genuine, and he had been right about all three, which was the error. Genuine grief and genuine distress and genuine bewilderment.
Reginald
are entirely
Ashbury, you are
compatible
under
with
arrest.
being in the
No,
architecture
this
of
is a
crime,
mistake.
a weight
And
bearing wall.
anti-bandit dark now.
He
Do
had made the category error of a man who is tired, and he had been tired on day 2, though he had not acknowledged it, of confusing the emotional state of a person with their structural role. The letter was from Reginald Fortescue. He was almost certain he would confirm it in the morning through means that would not require him to ask directly a question to Mrs. Alderton about the post, a question
Observe the
to Clara
hands,
about
so
the
tightly
correspondence
clasped, a
workflow,
classic sign of fear,
questions that
hidden
would
from the
arrive at
world.
the letter's sender
This
through the
person
back
lived in
door
terror of a
rather
secret
than
being
the
revealed.
front.
It is written
He was
here,
almost
plain as
certain.
day.
Reginald Fortescue,
Every detail of the
who
murder
had been
replays
close to
in my
his uncle
mind.
in the complicated way
Tonight,
that young
reverse
people are
knock
close
out
to
the chasm
difficult
to my
older
liking.
relatives, fond and knowing and occasionally wounded by the
This
knowing,
letter from Gerald Ashbury
who had
changes
known or
everything.
suspected
He
something
hid it
about
inside
the
the east
history of his
wall
uncle
alcove.
and his uncle's secretary,
No one else must know.
who had written 3 pages to Clara Tate, perhaps as warning, perhaps as plea, perhaps simply as the letter a person writes when they know something that seems important and cannot identify the correct person to tell it to. And Clara had not given it to Ashworth, had held it, had been holding it, between her decision and its execution, between the doorway in Marylebone and the night of day 0, as a document she was not yet certain how to use and not yet willing to destroy, because the letter said something that changed the shape of what she was planning, or confirmed it, or made it. He
You were
found the word
manipulating me
carefully,
this whole
in the dark,
time.
with the precision his work required
Indeed,
of him, more
the
legible.
game is over.
Made the thing she was already moving toward legible
You
as
thought
something
you could hide
other
this?
than purely personal,
I know everything.
as something
What is
with
that?
a wider
Where did you get
justification.
it? The details don't matter.
He lay
You
in the
will do
dark
as I
and thought
say,
about
or this goes
justification and
public.
what it does to a person's ability to proceed. The picture was assembling itself. Not quickly, not with a dramatic snap of things that arrive whole, slowly. The way a photographic image appears
I
in its
must appear
developing
innocent,
bath. First the
unaware
ghost
of
of a
any
shape,
guilt.
then the darks resolving,
My hands
then
stay
the
now.
lights,
Poirot's gaze
then
misses
finally
nothing.
the thing fully present in all its
Innocent.
unambiguous
I am innocent.
detail. Day
poison was in
-5,
the
the
cup.
conversation in the
Who
study,
poured it?
the offer that was not an
I
offer,
don't know.
the walk through the
And
cold
you, monsieur?
streets of Marylebone,
Your hand was on the
decision.
pot.
Day
It was not
-3, the argument not between Ashworth and Fortescue, though that had happened too. The argument Clara had overheard was between Ashworth and someone else. Between Ashworth and the person he had already told, a preliminary disclosure, a first use of the information he held. The argument he had been conducting, in various forms with various people, in the weeks since he had decided to act, and Clara in the adjoining office hearing it through the wall, understanding. Understanding not just what he was doing, but what he would continue to do.
The victim
that this
was
was his
seated here,
nature, confirmed
unmoving.
again, that she had not been
He
wrong
reached for the glass,
in
a
Marylebone,
moment of hesitation.
that the decision she had been moving
Locked,
toward was not
as
premature,
I suspected.
that there was no version of the future
The
she could
truth.
reach by waiting.
Poirot has
Day
known since the
-3
second
evening,
day.
Clara Tate had not been at dinner. She had gone home at 6, this was established. What was
Grief
also
is a curious
established
thing.
by the figure
exposes
observed
what we
moving
hide.
through the side
What are you
passage
implying,
at
Monsieur
11:09
Poirot?
on the night of day
The one who
0,
feigns mourning
and by
the
the
loudest
displaced
often has the
writing
most to
table,
conceal.
and by the open and then closed window, was that she had on a subsequent evening returned. She had a key to the house, she had always had a key to the house. 6 years of early arrivals and late departures had made this a practical necessity, and Ashworth had given it to her without apparent concern. Why would he concern himself? She was integral. She was self-contained. She was, in his assessment, fully managed. She had come back. She had come through the side passage and up the drain pipe and through the third-floor window, whose catch she knew because she had 6 years ago oiled it herself when it began to stick and had never mentioned doing so. She had come through the window and into the study.
Human
where
nature, my
Ashworth was
friends, is a
working
curious
late,
thing.
as he
It
so often
conceals
did,
dark
as she
truths.
knew he did.
And the
As someone
mind,
who
when
had
burdened
managed
by
his
guilt,
schedule
finds
for
it
6
difficult
years
to
would
remain
know
fast in the
precisely
smallest of gestures.
when he would be alone and working and prepared to receive a visitor who came through the door. She had not come through the door. She had come through the window, which had no memory, which would not be remembered as an entrance, which was, afterward, closed and latched and left as though it had never been anything other than a window. She had brought what was needed.
It
The
is a pleasure
substance,
to
he
make
had
your
been trying to
acquaintance.
identify it since
The
day
pleasure
one,
is mine,
Doctor.
Mr. Poirot.
Marsh's
understand you have an
description of the
intriguing tale
symptoms
to
had given
share,
him a range,
one that
and
demands
the
the
range
utmost
had narrowed
discretion.
when he considered what was available.
The arm of the
what
chair
was
conceals
accessible,
much, but
what
not
could
from
be
these eyes.
administered in a drink poured by
The invisible
someone else in a room
becomes
where
visible.
two glasses were
The
set
story
and
in
one
the
was
skin of the
afterwards
wood.
removed.
Human
She had
nature,
sat
my
across from
friends,
him.
is a
They had
labyrinth
talked,
of
presumably.
contradictions.
He
Beneath
had
surface
poured,
of
or she had
scintillating,
poured,
darker
managing it as
impulses
she managed
often lurk.
everything, with the
Do you
competent
not agree?
invisibility of a person who
pleasure
has
to make
always
your
been
acquaintance.
trusted to manage.
The pleasure
And
is
they
all
had
mine, Monsieur
spoken in the
Poirot.
lamplit room.
I trust your journey was agreeable.
While the house was quiet,
Quite.
and the February
The
cold
surroundings are
pressed
most
at the
intriguing.
closed window, and at
I
some
sit
point
alone
between
in
the
the
first
dark,
minute and the
replaying the
17th,
plan.
the thing had been
The
done,
moonlight
and
reveals my
Ashworth
trembling
had
hands.
known, and then had
The fire's glow
not
mirrors
known
the shadow
anything,
in
and
mine.
she
I
had
cannot
removed her
escape
glass. And she had moved along the wall, not the direct line, not the innocent exit, but the line of someone who has come in one way and must attend to certain matters before going out another, and she
Now,
had
let us see what
caught the
secrets
writing
you
table
hold.
with her coat, and she had gone through the door,
Yes,
and she
the
had washed her
invisible
hands in the
become
bathroom,
visible.
and she had gone down the stairs and out the front door
Now,
and
let
into
us
the
see what
street,
secrets you hold.
walking the way she always walked, purposefully at precisely
yes,
the
the
pace a
invisible
timeline
become
required.
visible.
The picture was fully present now. He lay in the dark and looked at it. This was always the moment he found most difficult. Not the assembling. The assembling was work, and he was good at work. And work had the quality
Regardez
of
les mains du
purpose that
sujet dans
carries
ce
a person
portrait.
through
Observez comme
difficulty.
elles sont crispées.
Not the
Elles
confrontation.
trahissent une peur
The
profonde, une
confrontation was
terreur
also
cachée dans
work,
l'âme.
of a different and
La
harder
vérité se lit dans
variety,
ses
but still
détails.
work, still the application of method. This was the moment between. The moment when the work was done and the confrontation had not yet begun, and the truth simply sat in the room with you, fully formed,
Reginald
asking
Ashbury,
nothing
you
and
are under
offering
arrest.
nothing, simply
This
being
is
what it
absurd!
was.
On what grounds?
He thought about Clara
Conspiracy
Tate.
and fraud. Hands
He
behind
thought
your
about
back.
26
You can't
years,
do this to
about
me!
a firm in Gray's Inn and
It
a
is a pleasure
lamplit
to make
office
your
in
acquaintance.
wartime and the particular
The pleasure is
compressed
mine, Mr.
atmosphere
Poirot.
of shared work and shared
I understand
hours.
you have an intriguing tale to
About an
share.
error of
One
judgment
that
on
demands
both
the
our
utmost
parts,
discretion.
said in 1918 by a man
The
who
arm of
meant
the
on
chair
your part,
conceals much,
and had said
but not
both
from these
because
eyes.
both was the more manageable phrasing.
The invisible
About
becomes
6
visible.
years in a house on
The
Baker
story
Street,
in the skin of the
organized
wood.
with the competence
Human
of a
nature,
person
my
who has
friends,
put
is
the
a labyrinth
alternative
of
drawer away and
contradictions.
locked it and continued.
Beneath surface of scintillating,
About the morning of day
darker
minus
impulses
5,
often lurk.
and a conversation conducted
not
in
agree?
pleasantness that was
Pleasure
precision
to
in
make your
costume,
acquaintance.
and an offer that
The
was not
pleasure
an
is all
offer,
mine, Monsieur
and a
Poirot.
walk through cold
I trust
streets
your journey
that
was
ended in
agreeable.
a doorway
Quite.
in Marylebone.
The surroundings are most
He
intriguing.
thought about Reginald Fortescue,
I sit
26
alone in
years
the
old,
dark,
in a
replaying
police
the plan.
cell since day 4,
moonlight reveals my
frightened and
trembling
bewildered
hands.
and innocent,
The
which
fire's
was the
glow
word the
mirrors
world
the
was
shadow
not
in mine.
currently
I
applying
cannot
to
escape
him.
it.
He thought about Edmund Ashworth, who had remembered everything, who had kept memory as a form of debt collection, who had been for 58 years the kind of person who does this, who manages
Now, let us see
and
what
holds and
secrets you
uses with the
hold.
pleasant, systematic efficiency of someone who has
Yes,
confused
the
power with
invisible
order.
become visible.
He thought about whether Edmund Ashworth had deserved to die.
Now, let us see
This
what
was not, he
secrets
told
you
himself
hold.
firmly, a thought he was permitted to think in his
Yes,
professional
the
capacity.
invisible become visible.
And yet the thought was present, and he was honest enough, in the dark, in the privacy of his own mind, to allow it its moment. He did not resolve it. He had never been able to resolve it in the cases where it arose. It was the
Regardez
crack
les
in the
mains du
structure
sujet
of
dans
his
ce
work
portrait.
that he had
Observez
learned to
comme elles
live
sont
with.
crispées.
The place where
Elles
justice
trahissent une
and
peur
mercy
profonde,
pulled in
une terreur
different
cachée dans
directions,
l'âme.
and he could not
La
follow
vérité se lit dans
both.
ses
And the
détails.
law had to serve as the bridge between them, even when the bridge felt insufficient. He would name her tomorrow evening. He would do it because it was what he did. Because Reginald Fortescue
Reginald
was in a
Ashbury,
cell,
you are under
and
arrest.
the law had made a wrong
This is
conclusion,
absurd!
and
On
that
what
wrong
grounds?
conclusion was
Conspiracy
itself an
and fraud.
injustice
Hands
layered
behind your
on
back.
top of the
You
original
can't do
injustice.
this to me!
And Poirot could not allow. Injustice to compound could not, even when the truth that corrected it was a truth that cost him something to tell. He had known in some corner of himself for 2 days. He had been hoping he was wrong. He was not wrong. He reached for the notebook on the bedside table, opened it in the dark. He did not need light for this, he knew the page.
Human
He
nature,
found
mes
by
amis, is a
touch the
most
column of
curious thing.
names, found the
It
one
compels one
beside
to
which
act
he had
against
written
one's
nothing
own
for 5
interests.
days. He felt for the
And the
pencil,
eyes, they
wrote 2
reveal what
words
the
by
lips will
feel in the
not.
dark. He knew
sit
the words
alone,
were there,
replaying it
correctly
in my
formed,
mind.
though he could not see
The
them.
silence of the library echoes
He had
my
written them with the
thoughts.
certainty of a man who has
My
done the
hands
most
betray the
difficult
fear
part
I
of the
hide.
work and must now do the hardest part. He set down the notebook. He closed his eyes. Outside, in Baker Street, a motor car passed, its headlamps sweeping the blackout curtains for one moment.
Reginald
A moving
Ashbury,
line of
you are
light
under
at the
arrest.
curtain's edge,
No!
gone
This is
before
a
it could
mistake!
illuminate anything.
The
The house settled around him, old and quiet and full of sleeping and not sleeping people, none of whom knew that the night was doing its last work, that somewhere in the dark of a small south-facing room the shape of the truth had finally fully emerged from the fog. And the man who had found it lay still and breathed and felt, instead of triumph, the precise and particular grief of someone who has always loved the truth.
Observe
and
the
has not
hands,
always
so
loved what
tightly
the truth
clasped, a classic
turned
sign
out
of
to be.
fear, hidden
Tomorrow
from the
he would
world.
make the telephone call.
This person lived in terror of a secret being
Tomorrow
revealed.
evening the fire
It is
would
written
burn
here,
in the
plain
study,
as day.
and the clock would tick on the mantelpiece.
Every detail of the
and
murder
6 people
replays
would
in my
assemble
mind.
in a room that had, 6
Tonight
days ago,
reverse knock
been
out
the
the
last
chest
room
to my
Edmund
mic.
Ashworth would ever occupy. And Poirot would stand at the center
This
and
letter
speak.
from Gerald Ashbury
We
changes
have already
everything.
seen what that looked
He
like
hid
from
it
the
inside the
outside.
east wall
The chair
alcove.
scraping back,
No one
the
else
hand
must
pressed
know.
to the mouth, the glass set down with excessive precision. We have seen the room from a distance, from the documentary remove of a narrator assembling the pieces for maximum impact. Now we must go back to that room. Now, with everything we have traveled through to be here, day -5 and day -3 and the night of the crime and the false arrest and the interview on day 3 and the midnight of day 6, we must return to 9 o'clock on day 7 and be present for it, fully present, with all our knowledge and all our grief. We have earned the right to hear what Poirot says.
You were manipulating me this whole time. Indeed, the game is over.